Armchair General 5, and we're going to be playing some Hearts of Iron 4. Today we're going to be continuing the campaign that we are fighting, the somewhat non-traditional campaign. So we need to check out things like our background here of production to see how things are doing. And hello, Soul the Civ guy. Right. What? Places to get rubber that we could trade with. If we take Belgium, I think most of their rubber is coming from down here, which if we invade it, we wouldn't get it. Invade up here. Now if we invaded down there, we could get it, yes. Okay. Let's look at our Air Force control of zones. Oh, it's still, since we just started up, it hasn't clicked in yet. It's to give us the cool colors and figure out what's going on. Okay. Fire concentration enables tactic overwhelming firepower. Line artillery, defense +5, organization +5. Mobile recon and assault. Instantly gain armored car organization and light tank organization. Anti-tank front line, engineer company, engineer battalions, entrenchment increases. Field engineering, engineering companies, movement, assault engineering company, pioneers. Subdoctrinal, though a subdoctrinal, we specialize and perfect our warfare within this particular field. I think artillery will be infantry. And hello, Lum. How you doing today? I know it's a bit more evening there, but okay, mobile infantry. Large unit tactics. Great War infantry. Defensive postures instantly grants. Assault infantry support attack. Soft attack plus 10% for artillery. Ah. Yeah, we'll do. So, mobile infantry, fire concentration. Well, you're playing the April 1st update of Equestria at War mod for Hoi 4 right now, and it's pretty fun. Well, cool. I still vaguely remember playing that. We just used up a lot of our points so we can't move ahead on these just yet. Air wings with no mix. Standing by there. To naval strike. I think out here to control the air. See? These guys can go out there and naval strike as well. Fighters down here. I think I deployed and never actually gave them orders as to what areas to operate in. We've got 700 operating down here. 200 here. Now we push them back from any bases here, but I think we'll still put up another. Got a squadrons. Here. Very good. Bombers now. Don't know if I want to have them bomb yet. Same with those. Duto, how are you doing? Mastery on the doctrines is automatic as troops fight and train. No, oh, okay. Okay, so that's purely a. I knew you got more as you fought more, but I figured it was a. I had to select to go down. Like I say, guys, I've been away from this game for about 2 years until coming back to it, and I've only been playing it, looking for free air bases. Poland. Okay, well we're just cancel the mission. War. We've got Slovakia, Legionary, Romania, and Hungary as our allies. Then look at the border here. Okay, we should create a mobile force of allies. Put them whose command. Narrings. Okay, so let's take a look. Just see what these are like. Well, I got 180 Strasa V4 tanks. What the hell is that? Okay, so no supporting equipment for this unit. Simply light tanks and motorized infantry. What we're looking at? Template. Now this motorized unit here. Just motorized infantry, but with support artillery. Good. And the Romanian unit is a bit better. They have artillery support and anti-tank support, as well as tanks and now let's reorganize this. He has 11 Spawn Welch. We're going to put him, we're going to make Von Welch our northern command. Rationalizing the front here. Now, starting here, Gotthard Heinrich will be the commander instead of somebody else. Give him the Romanian. Yeah, I think. Well, let's take a quick look at this Romanian infantry division. Okay, somewhat like ours, but unlike ours, they've got a standardized or a frontline artillery unit. I think that makes artillery more susceptible to frontline losses, or it really does. Okay, we will give him that. Now back here, yeah. And down here, okay. Our Slovak groups. Yeah, you're going to go over to him. He's now too big. Where are some of his other forces? Let's see. Ah, right here. Okay. Right, these divisions, which we're going to have to get organized to go take out Belgium. I know I should maybe be doing all of this off camera because it's not the most exciting, but like I said, I've only been playing on camera for you. Guys here. Okay. It's too many divisions for him. Well, let's start another. Corps, find an army. This is infantry, so infantry experience factor 100% promotion cost. Okay. Run weeks in here. Paulus is coming west. Maybe we should have put him under Palace. Yeah, let's take all these divisions and get them here. Yes, okay. Palace is going to be our... Like I say, we're rationalizing the front here. That then reduces down his command burden and is only going to be on one front. Let's see what this... No, we don't have control of that one. They didn't get... They get to give us control of this one here. And, yeah, it's just infantry. Okay. Okay, we've got 2 divisions here. Where are all the rest of his divisions? Well, up north, that's right. He was the Northern Command. Well, I want to have some forces down here along the Soviet border. Now maybe he should be the new command down here. Send them off over to here. Let's move you up to there. All right, well, that's getting the Eastern Front in a little bit of shape. But I'm hoping to take down the Western Front before having to go at the Eastern. Really, no, yeah, I want to move him here. I want to come here. Create an east or another command unit here. We'll go into Von Kluge. Well, Well, hello, Tubies. Yes, I did have a very good week. Is it even possible to play an entire playthrough with no war? That's an interesting question. Now, how do I put this? I don't know. You bring up a very interesting philosophical question. I know it's sort of early for me to start thinking on all of this and not playing some, so I'm not going to go too much into it. But was World War II, not necessarily World War II the way World War II happened, because various I could easily see various factors changing. A good one was the Navy was refusing to go to war with the primarily the U.S. as far as, or maybe they just thought that if they attacked Britain at all, the U.S. would come into the war. I don't really know. I don't know if it's really known. And when I say that, do we have like minutes of meetings? Because I presume maybe not every discussion. Because you can have a general and admiral meeting somewhere, privately and just talking about things, and not in a formal meeting setting with a somebody taking down notes or a stenographer type. But generally speaking, if you're planning a a war, you're going to agree to things like, and I overpowered League of Nations modification. Yeah, interesting. That if you know how much for Japan, there was a massive divide between the Army and the Navy. They were basically independent of each other, and there's almost two armies. I guess we'll just do him because he's the one option we have here. There was an army up here in definitely Manchukuo. I'm not sure how much those commanders had control of the units in Korea. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was a unified command or not. But then there was the army command in Japan. My understanding is the political government, and it does change over in the late 20s and early 30s, the situation. They assassinate the democratically elected, and they make a lot of this out in the politics. The junior army officers, ones that if things fail could literally get the chop, not figuratively but literally get the chop. So they use so it's not the high command. It's sort of elements within the high command allowing, encouraging, whatever some lower level officers to do things. And this is sort of the case is what happens with Manchuria or Manchukuo. they're sort of, but once that sort of switches over and the army is taking over the government, now I think it's as late as 41, but like early in 41 is when Tojo um, takes over the government or becomes, prime minister in effect, whether they call it a premier or whatever. We got a cheap views bot, but I think Arno's probably either gone to sleep or figure I wasn't going to be streaming today, even though I put the time back. He didn't, I don't think, notice. I knew I wasn't going to be good waking up too early. Um, and I've read a bunch, but I don't remember if I ever really heard a lot of the details because I was mostly reading about the naval campaigns um, in the Pacific. But there's sort of a traditional army leadership that is generally speaking responding to um, the central government, shall we say, though they've approved this new central government after the assassination. Out here, these guys are sort of doing their own thing. I think to a point, the army back here is approving, but I mean, I don't know how much they're approving the individual actions, but thinking what they're doing generally is good. I think to a point they want it to be deniable. Let me just get bothering me here. And I think to a point it's not just denying it to like the be able to go, oh my god, these guys are out of hand, we'll get them reined in if the world starts really reacting to it. I think there's an element of that, rogue military leaders, and we can call them back in kind of thing if they're unsuccessful. But I also think they're trying to be able to deny that to the, if you will, civil government. Now Tojo, he ends up in charge of like 3 departments. Not that he's running 3 departments. One of them being, the Ministry of War. I forget, like one maybe Foreign Affairs, and I forget. So he's in charge of like 3 of them. Not that he's like fully running the, like all the problems the normal head of department would be seeing. He's getting on his desk. I think it's much more of a control situation that he's appointing his people that are running those departments. So I don't think he was actively running his 3 department heads, as well as being, prime minister, overseeing the whole thing. But prior to him taking over as prime minister, I'm not sure if it was his immediate previous job or just his main job, stepping up. He was in charge of the Kempitai in Manchukuo. Okay. So that's basically the military secret police, if you want to call them secret police. I don't know. And secret police aren't secret in that they exist. Are sort of secret police are their activities are secret, meaning they're this is one thing I know conspiracy theorists, and they're not 100% wrong on everything, but they might think that the U.S. has secret police. But most secret polices we can talk about, they're openly acknowledged that they exist. It's their activities are not public record, if you will. Meaning, if they arrest somebody, they just arrest somebody. It's not like, when somebody gets arrested in the United States, they have a number of hours. I think it's within 48 hours. They have to file arrest records, and that says that they're in such and such jail, they're arrested for these crimes. They also have to, within 48 hours, go before a judge with at least some charges, and then they arraign the person or persons, which could be, okay, yeah, we're going to give you bail, we're going to keep you without bail, we're going to, whatever it might be, and, start setting trial dates and that kind of thing. So if you get arrested for uncooperative behavior with the police because you start shouting at them, when they're trying to deal with you, shout at them, and then they arrest you, okay, and then okay, they're charging you with something, okay. Now they might, if they're just arresting you, sometimes they're arresting you sort of for your own safety because you may be drunk or something, and drunk in public is what they're arresting you for. But once you're no longer drunk, and if you weren't, too badly misbehaving, they may just drop the charges and let you go home. But that's all, public record. Where secret police, people often mistake the idea that their secrecy, that their, the whole department is secret or something. No, it's just they can go in and do something, and if they were uniformed or whatever, and you go to where they're, one of their headquarters, offices, whatever it is, they're not necessarily telling you or publishing what's up. Do they even acknowledge that they've arrested person X? So that's sort of secret police. That's why I say, and the Kempeitai was a military police, unlike basically in the U.S. the military police, even during the war, when we never really had. I mean, we had martial law basically declared in Hawaii because, it's, sort of a frontline territory kind of thing. But through most of it, in most of the United States, the military police, unless they're directly involved, cannot really touch U.S. citizens. And I say directly involved because sometimes, the military police would come into a fight that was between, a member of the military, could be the Navy, could be the Air Corps, could be the, the Army or whatever, and some civilians. And so you may arrest, everybody involved. But they would be as immediately as practical turning over the civilians to civilian authorities because they had no authority over civilians. So yeah, just like in theory, any citizen can stop a crime in progress. And if you see a bank robbery and you want to tackle one of the robbers, you can do it. So military police could do that. But the whole, once you've secured the situation, you're supposed to, turn the individual, the civilians over to the civilian legal authorities, and not be to the military system. And we had military police all over the United States because you had soldiers, individually, getting orders to go to cross the United States, mostly on trains, or units or groups of them, are all being shifted around. And so they got depots, they got whatever. Soldiers get drunk, soldiers get rowdy, soldiers like, hey, where's my food? I have no money, or whatever it may be. So there were military police all over the nation, very much so at larger bases or at any base, because military police, there were specialized units, but then there were also people, soldiers, sailors, whatever, that were temporary duty, and then they got the armband, which may be just for like a few hours, kind of thing, and give temporary duty, not as a career within the Navy or the Army or whatever. But they did also get both volunteers and draftees, civilian police officers, and because of their experience, they were often put into often pretty quickly into command, maybe just sergeants or whatever, but in command within the military police. Now, some of those units do get shipped overseas to be near frontline or very near frontline type activities. But they have no real authority over the civilian um, system, and they're not even really guarding vital production centers, aircraft factories or whatever. Those are normally non-military, whether security guards, private company, working for the company normally, or if a company, would hire another security guard company, or again, more civil police and civil things, as far as I know. But military, actual, like Navy installations, Army, air bases, whatever, those would have some level of military police around them to protect them. And of course, just others, soldiers would be on guard duty too, of course. Um, and there were definitely that kind of stuff going on. Okay, so Dutovich. So basically, the Japanese government was a big six: prime minister, yeah, chief of Navy and staff, and the Emperor and the Privy Council. To some degree, yes. Some of the titles might be stated wrong. Yes, that's basically what you're looking at for Japan. But there very well may have been, whether you call it Minister of War or um, Minister of Defense, I'm pretty sure it's Minister of War. Um, but, and I guess my point is the Minister of War, whether, and at times I think that was Tojo, times that in Japan, that ministerial job is somebody wearing a uniform on active duty service. Where in the U.S., because even though, the president is technically military, we talk about civilian authority over the army or over the military, and there is in the sense of the House of Representatives and the U.S. Senate, approves budgets, approves there's a legal code, Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ or whatever. That is approved by Congress. It's not just the Army making up its own rules or the Navy making up its own rules. They, of course, make up the rules, but then get it approved through Congress, if you know what I mean. So we do have that. But the commander-in-chief, which is a military position, and the only one that I know that's ever worn a uniform while doing so, I believe over like the Whiskey Rebellion or something, is George Washington himself. Not just had worn a uniform prior to it, like had been in, because up until Clinton, I think all U.S. presidents from the, I don't know how far back, but definitely from World War II. FDR was in the Navy before he had polio, or they now think maybe it was something else, but a similar thing to polio. From FDR up until Clinton, every U.S. president was in the military. Some, just like Truman, was just in the military for World War I, was not a career. Reagan was in the military, but he was never deployed. Basically, he was in the military, but doing training films for the military. Some minimal military training, but not really like, and I remember my leftist teachers making fun. Oh, Reagan wasn't really in the army, blah, 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 blah. He was. He was never deployed overseas. That's very true. but and so he never saw combat, or or even tangent, even just overseas in a theater or whatever. Um, I don't know how much that was his desire versus how much it was uh, willing to go on. I know John Wayne tried to get into the military, but because of his age and such, he wanted to go in as an officer, and he had, because a lot of movie stars, richer than the average person, but they weren't necessarily terribly rich back at that time. And John Wayne is just right around World War II, just getting really famous. He had been sort of a B or C movie type lead that was just sort of a contract employee. Meaning he had a contract. Not like, oh well, how much you'll pay me for this next movie? No, you're working here 5 days a week. You're getting paid, $100 a week, which in the 1930s that's a lot of money, or whatever. With a car costing $200-300 or something. So it's like it's good money, but it's not like, oh hey, I'm super rich, and it's only like what, around 1939 or something. He really starts his, but so he never goes into the military. Does a lot of war films during the period. Now, James Stewart, Jimmy Stewart, whatever you want to call him, he enlists as a private in the Air Corps. I think at the end of the war, he leaves as a colonel or a major. But he flies, and so does Clark Gable. Also, Clark Gable's like a door gunner or a waist gunner on a B-17, and flies the missions. And so does Jimmy Stewart. Now, Jimmy Stewart ends up a general in the Air Force. Post-war, he continues while doing Hollywood. Now it's more like a reserve position, but he actively is more than just a spokesman type role. But he's definitely, he goes in, and yeah, I'm sure his rise is partially responsible for his fame, but so a lot. But the point is a lot of the presidents had military backgrounds, but they had often been some time out of the military. Now, one of the quicker out of the military into the president, of course, was Eisenhower. But it's still, you're going through the elected process. You're there as a civil thing. To get back to Japan, and we're still talking about the inevitability of World War II. Wayne Studio did a lot of pressure to keep him out. Yeah, and what they were... My understanding, and I'm a big John Wayne fan, and whatever the case was for World War II is what it was. My understanding is that they did pressure to keep him out of the draft. Okay? Not out of the military. Meaning the studio didn't want him drafted and sent somewhere and not be able to be involved in things. John Wayne tried to get enlisted as an officer, and he was supposedly, again, I don't know, this may be Hollywood misinformation. So you got to remember, guys, the key to success. And hello, Zoe Kuroinen. I'm hoping I'm not butchering that too badly. The key to success in Hollywood is sincerity. And when you can fake that, you got it made. Which means, however sincere anybody in Hollywood looks, it's all phony. So, authorized and unauthorized biographies can be a lot of bullshit. So my understanding is he was trying to get in as an officer. The studio wanted him to be there to make movies. They wanted to keep him out so he isn't sent off to be private somebody somewhere and not making movies. Where had he gone in as an officer, could have been like Reagan, who did go in as an officer. Um, get duties that would allow him to still make movies. So that's my understanding, but I don't know for sure. Understand the studio also threatened Wayne if he really volunteered. Well, my understanding is he tried, and I don't know. Yes, Charles Bronson was a ball turret gunner. Jackie Coogan, um, you may know him, and there's the Coogan law here in California, or well, I'm no longer in California, but in California about child actors, because he was one of the biggest paid actors, and he found out he had no money because he was a child actor, and his parents spent it all, basically stole it from him, and one of them was like a stepdad or something, stole all of his money. But he was the kid, which people knew him, and he made huge amounts of money. Um, but he was broke. And um, you may also know Jackie Coogan as Uncle Fester in the original Addams Family series, the original one. That's Jackie Coogan. Hollywood royalty from the kid is in him as a kid was in the silent era of the movies. Um, he was a glider pilot, and you know maybe on D-Day, but on several of the drops into Europe. I think maybe D-Day and a few others. He, and when a glider pilot, once he's done being a glider pilot, he's now an infantryman. He's got a gun in his hand, and he's in the drops behind German lines, kind of thing. So it wasn't just like some training role or whatever. He was also there. So there's a bunch of Hollywood people. Yeah, no, they actually served. Charles Bronson was also Britain's hardest prisoner. Only joking. I think you may be talking about the Dirty Dozen or something there. Yeah, no, there's also a bunch of other to be stars, not yet stars that like Charles Bronson, who wasn't, I don't believe, anything in the motion picture prior to going into the military. They were after it. But so back to Japan. Um, you definitely had some sort of Minister of War title. Like I say, at times, especially like when Tojo comes into power. I also note Tojo's like out of power by like somewhere in 1944. So he's actually lost power, but the Japanese still, they don't know how to end the war, even though he's lost the confidence of the army and has been removed from power. So basically under house arrest. Um, the Navy and the Army were not necessarily, unless that Army general was approved by the Army hierarchy. Um, the Army is not necessarily responding. Well, he's basically, may appear to be responding to the central government or civil government or whatever you want to call it of Japan. Under the emperor. The emperor has loose control of things. He doesn't have tight control. He's not like Hitler or Mussolini, but more of a ruler than, say, the King Victor Emmanuel II of Italy, who, has some power but is not governing at all. So, that's for the Army. The Navy is not responding, literally, not responding to the Minister of War. Um, even after they're at war with China, the Navy's doing its own thing. The Navy or the Army has to negotiate with the Navy for things. It's not like, oh, hey, the commander in chief appoints, somebody, and they then tell the Navy what to do, and the Navy must do it, or you're fired. If Admiral King wasn't doing what FDR or whatever wanted to have happen, um, well, the president will tell the Secretary of War, fire, dismiss Admiral King. No, they were their own sort of independent hierarchy from each other. This is how divided. So, um, at one point, there's almost breaks out a civil war, but in Japan, inside of Japan, this is prior to going to war with the Western Allies. It almost breaks out into a civil war between the Army and the Navy, because the Navy's got lots of rifles too. Don't think that they don't. And hey, it's Japan. Navy's got lots of artillery as well as aircraft, as much or more than the Army does. And so the Army has lots of artillery, as in their big ships that in most of the cities and vital points are along the coast. So yeah, they don't need field artillery. They just got shipboard artillery. And yeah, so there almost breaks out a civil war in Japan between the two. And the final thing that they're really struggling to get, both the Army and the Navy are very much basically age seniority, but also to a degree job seniority. So it's not just who's the oldest guy in the room, um, though that is very much an element of it, but it's also who's been in whatever jobs the longer. If you've got four generals and they're all, if one of them got promoted a year or two earlier, and one of them might be a year older than the guy that got promoted a year or two earlier, or whatever, just somewhere along the promotion track. Yeah, it isn't necessarily the oldest guy in the room, but it's the most senior, however the most senior works out. The Army and the Navy are both that, but I know more about the Navy situation. The old senior guys in the Navy that are running the Navy, they totally get that their best guy is, and even better than them, is Yamamoto. Okay, Admiral Yamamoto. They know that, and they're still going to run the Navy, but they're letting him, and they're approving it. He comes up with some sort of plan, and they review it and go, yeah, go ahead and do it. They realize that he's the star, the shining star. Yamamoto is like, no, don't go to war with the Western Allies. Whatever you do, don't do that. And that's his advice. And for some considerable time, they're taking it. But eventually, one of the biggest difficulties in Japan at the time is steel. The Army doesn't have enough steel for its production. It has the ability to produce more things, rifles, artillery pieces, tanks, trucks, whatever. Meaning it has the factory equipment to produce more than they're producing, because they don't have enough steel. And there's different qualities. The rifle barrel needs to be a different quality steel than the trigger guard on that same rifle, if you know what I mean. So not all steel is the same, but Japan, there's just isn't enough steel for the actual, not just theoretical demands, but the actual what we could actually put into production use. They don't have enough steel. And this is part of their problem, is because FDR has a family background that was in the China trade. And the American China trade is very different than the British China trade. Meaning there's no opium involved. And so FDR and crew have a lot more association with China. And I think it's somewhat a moral principle, somewhat a practical principle. Because I'll tell you what, a lot of Americans see that the Russian aggression against Ukraine is just that. It's just aggression. Conquer land. We want land. And we also, maybe to a point, want the people too. But we want to control things. And so they see it not as, like what the U.S. is doing with Iran. A lot of the people in the Western world, not just Americans, see that the Iranian regime is an evil regime. Now, is it worth to a lot of the other people out there? Is it worth the increased fuel cost? Maybe the lives lost of their military and or civilians if there's terrorist attacks in their country. They may not see, as well as the monetary loss. How much it's going to cost to fight a war with Iran. So they may go, oh hey, yeah, Iran's evil, but it's going to be really expensive, and maybe in lives, not just in dollars, but really expensive to take out Iran. So yeah, we're not going to go take out every single evil country on the planet, because if you look at China or something, that may end up in global thermal nuclear war. Is it worth all of us dying to try to make China a better place? Right? And so we can definitely look and see the difference in the right now as I'm sitting in here. Hey, Jemnuska. As I'm sitting here, the U.S. attack on Iran versus Russian attack on Ukraine is very different. Sure, the U.S. may want to sort of control or whatever some oil flows, and there is some geopolitical benefit potentially for the U.S. and regime modification or whatever with Iran. Yeah, I'm not saying it's entirely and I will also say this: Trump did not start the war. Trump definitely started the most recent military actions. The war started in 1979, not before. And as people want to keep pointing out, no, Mossadegh and the CIA. No, that was against Mossadegh, which was a leftist, secularist, pro-Soviet personality in Iran. No, this is the Islamic Revolution, which becomes the Islamic revolutionary government of Iran. So it's this group of people. They start the war in 79 when they take our embassy for 444 days, kill a few of us, and then kill a bunch of Marines in Lebanon and support a bunch of Iraqi insurgents against U.S. occupation. They have been at war, and before we went into Iraq, they were responsible for the USS Cole attack, which killed Americans there. They've been at war with the U.S. Oh, the Houthis, they've been at war with us now, and us in the West, which includes Britain and Germany and France. They've been at war with us, whether we've acknowledged that or not. So the war has been going since 79. The official government people are the ones that organize and participate in, meaning they say death to America. It's not just, oh, hey, yeah, I'm sure we can find 1,000 Americans that'll say death to some country. We can find a bunch of Americans that'll say death to Russia right now. But you don't hear the U.S. president or the U.S. Congress out there chanting death to Russia. Okay. So we're talking about central government policy of Iran is death to America. Their only issue is how to make that happen. Not, so there's been no they've been at war with the U.S. So Trump isn't starting. Trump is trying to end this, not didn't start this. Hey, Exurgent, how you doing? How many Americans say death to America? Well, plenty. You're absolutely right. No, that's fine. No, you're absolutely right. And hello, Heavenly Spirit of Psalm. I'm doing well. So, so there's a difference between what Russia's doing in Ukraine and what Trump or the U.S., or however you want to say it, is doing in Iran. Right. So, we can look at that. But the U.S. people, however much they saw sometimes staged, but photos and film of terrible suffering in China. The U.S. people did not want to go to war with Japan for China. Oh, sure, they would maybe give money to a Red Cross relief drive program to raise funds to buy medical relief. Oh, sure, the Flying Tigers that briefly existed as sort of a pseudo mercenary type unit that were U.S. flyers, mostly Air Force, but also at least few Marine pilots, maybe some naval pilots that were let out of their current contract to go fly, meaning they were currently serving U.S. pilots that Chanot was allowed to go and recruit, but they were officially leaving the military, that they wanted to go. Now, how much did the individual pilots, and as well as some ground crew, maintenance people and whatnot, also went too? So it was more than just some pilots. How much were they really concerned over the plight of the poor Chinese versus, hey, I get to get into some action and get some training and experience in real combat in our aircraft? I don't know, on an individual basis. But and that is officially allowed to happen. But that's still going, hey, the U.S. as a government is not going to war with you, Japan. Oh, hey, yeah, you're really behaving really badly. We're not going to sell you any steel. Oh, no more oil. That was the other big thing too, of course. But that going on to the situation. So the people, and as well as the government, was in no way, and I don't even think FDR is in no way wanting to go to war with Japan over China. But there is also a geopolitical situation in a Japanese empire sitting in the Pacific is a threat to serious American interests. It may not really be in the idea that they're going to invade and conquer the U.S. Maybe some U.S. territory, Guam, which they did, or Hawaii, which they, attacked. I mean, if they thought they could have, Japan would have moved in and occupied Hawaii. Just militarily, they were unable to do so, but they would have had they could have. So, and U.S., there's other interests beyond that. So the U.S. is, has interest, national interests with China. So, and the whole theater, but they're not going to war with them. The Navy finally agrees to go to war with the U.S. for steel. The Japanese Army bribes the Navy with a much larger allotment of steel because Japan has some ships in production, including some battleships and some carriers that are in production that are basically either stalled out or very slow going production because they don't have the freaking steel. It's not that they don't have the workers. It's not that they don't have the machinery to make the gun barrels or to make the various fittings on the ships, the various pipes and whatever. It's not that they can't have a limitation on how much that they a machine tool is how many things it can make a day, a week, or whatever with a machine tool. They don't have enough steel, and so a significant I know I read, but a significant larger allotment of steel to complete some of these projects, that the hierarchy over Yamamoto's objections agrees to go to war with the U.S. And it is so bad. I know, and it's just an interesting factoid. There is one battleship, was it the Musashi or something? One battleship, I forget which battleship, that has an air conditioner on it in the Japanese Navy. And it's only air conditioning the quarters of Yamamoto. They put it in because Yamamoto is basically trapped aboard this ship because they believe that the Army will either assassinate, most likely, or arrest him if they can. So, and they're worried that even if he's living on an army base, that the army may do a quick thrust. A bunch of soldiers show up and just overwhelm, be willing to shoot if necessary, the guards and either kill or secure Yamamoto, because they know that he is the one that's objecting, and the rest of the hierarchy is going along with his objecting. And remember, Yamamoto spent about a year or more in the United States, traveled all the way across the United States, was going to school. He was a naval officer, but going to school, known for his poker playing. But he travels, not just like flies or takes the train across once or and back. No, he goes to Texas and goes to Detroit and sees the manufacturing, and travels around for a while and sees all this stuff. And so he's none of these other old admirals had done anything like that. And so he's sort of the American expert, as well as being the bright star of the naval operations for Japan. And so they're believing him when he's saying that it's a sleeping giant or whatever. I don't know that he uses those terms, but in effect he's saying that to them, that if their army may be small and our army may be able to militarily defeat the American army today. Obviously much of it's tied up in China, but we may have a better army. We may have a bigger air force. We may have better airplanes. We may have more of those airplanes. But you're going to lose. No matter what, you're going to lose. No matter how many victories you have, you're going to lose. But he's a dutiful naval officer and a true patriot for his nation. And when they go to war, he does his best to fight that war. And so I'll get to the chat here in just a moment. I pay attention to all chats. Fortunately for that, I have few people chatting, so I can keep up with it. But so you look at is World War II, and I'm still on this, and I haven't forgotten it. Is it avoidable? Yes, we can say the Yamamoto is listened to. The army doesn't get the Navy to go along with, because the army can't get to the Philippines to attack it. The army can't get to Malaya and Singapore to attack it. The army can't get to the Dutch East Indies to attack it, to secure the oil. It cannot do that. It obviously can't get to Hawaii. Now, the army eventually makes its own submarines and literally gets its own produced submarines. Now, those submarines, some of them I don't think had torpedoes on them. Some of them I think may have. But they were Army-commanded submarines that were being used purely as some of these bases and places, Army garrisons, were being cut off to resupply. So you got Army officers, not naval officers, put in command of a submarine that's iffy. Not that it's a death trap, but it's not very good, and definitely not going to, if it's actually attacked, it's not going to survive an attack by the Americans. So, but going, from whatever base to whatever base, maybe some fairly long distance ones, resupplying them with food and munitions and whatnot, because a lot of these bases, there's nowhere near the growing capacity. I mean, in the Philippines, generally speaking, maybe not every little base, but in the Philippines, there's enough local food supply to supply the army. They don't have to bring in food. Now, there's probably no munitions, no bullets or artillery shells being produced. So if you want to resupply or increase supply, you got to get supply links to Japan. And so, but realizing that this, jump here between Korea and Japan for manufacturing going both ways, the army can get enough ships to handle that. But it can't go anywhere else. So it needs the cooperation, the active cooperation, not just the sort of passive cooperation that they're getting for their war. War with China, the Navy does agree to do some landings around Shanghai, does some landings wherever else, and they're sort of kind of patrolling to keep the Chinese from getting arms being shipped in. But they're yeah, it's active, but it isn't like hugely vigorously active, if you will. It's active, but it isn't like we're charging in. There's definitely the Navy's Air Force. There's an Army's Air Force and the Navy's Air Force, and they were both responding to their own commands. No idea of an independent Air Force. Like Germany, like Britain they had independent Air Forces. The U.S. Army, or the U.S. Army Air Corps, is a semi-independent Air Force. Whereas the U.S. Navy Air Arm is entirely responding to the Navy High Command. So the war could have been contained to China, if we're looking at a particular date, or the Japanese could have controlled Army's desire for expansion and taken Manchukuo and not gone further or something like that. But is World War II inevitable? I would say, because yes, Hitler comes to power. By 31, 32, because it's, really sort of, what is it, around January 33 or whatever, it's very at the start of 33, I forget the exact date. Hitler is named Chancellor of Germany with Franz von Papen. Germany doesn't always, vice chancellor isn't like the U.S. vice president. It isn't an always office. It's a sometimes office. He's made vice chancellor because they thought they could control the Nazis. The I forget the exact name, but the nationalist government, the right wing government of Germany, I think was never a majority government. They were often, prior to the rise of the Nazis, they were often maybe the largest party, winning seats in the Reichstag and whatnot. But they weren't a majority government. They were always sort of needing a coalition of other members in their parliament to get things done. And it was sort of like, well, do you cooperate with us, or do you cooperate and join forces with the communists, or who do you do? And of course, the Nazis, once they were unbanned and rising to power, they would often support the nationalists as a distinct factor from the Nazis, in various votes and whatnot. So yeah, and Hindenburg is the president, and he wins those elections because he is personally popular, even with people that might vote for other sort of centrist. Probably not a communist dude is voting for him, but not people outside of his party would vote for him for president. But and so I don't see Hitler as a foregone inevitable thing, because hell, he almost dies several times. There's at the beer hall putsch, he's in the group that's being shot at. People around him are dying, and the Nazis are definitely as much. And I'm sorry I haven't been looking at the chat. And hello, Lonnie. Wow. I'll get to some of the chats here. For those of you who don't know, and I know some of you do, I had a history course in university, an upper division course, just on Hitler. I mean, there was like 13 students in it, and it was it was not a very formal structured lecture course. It was more of a directed research course. And our main grade was on our paper that we wrote and presented, and my paper, and I think I still have a copy of it somewhere, and this is in the pre sort of, save everything digitally age. And sometimes I might be willing to publish it if I ever come across it again and put it out there for you guys. But it was on Hitler's rise to power. I don't remember all of the different people's, but one guy I do. His was sort of Hitler and the Bauhaus movement, which is an architectural movement, and looking at some of that. He was an architectural student. But so I've had a university, full semester, full course. And we also, I also heard the other students as the professor was running this course. So I've had a course just on Hitler, not just I've also had a course on, an overall course on World War II, and whatnot. So I know a bit more than the average person. Not that I know everything, but a bit more than the average person about Hitler and the rise of the Nazis and whatnot. It very much was a personality-driven movement, meaning, yes, the message hit the right notes, if you will, with enough of the German people. And this is what I warned. And so far I don't see it truly. I know, should I call myself a Nazi? Because if I remember right, Bush the Younger was worse than Hitler, and Mitt Romney was as bad as Hitler, and and Trump is worse than anything. And the ICE is, what is it? Immigration and Customs Enforcement. They're just the Gestapo. And I support all those people. So am I, should I start supporting Hitler? And for a bunch of people out there, it is not just rhetoric. They truly believe these things. As far as I can tell, the AfD in Germany is not Nazi .20. It's run by a lesbian whose wife or whatever is from Sri Lanka. The most large popular, I mean, there may be some, 10 guys in a room that's a German party that's more conservative or something. But the most conservative national whatever party in Germany is run by a lesbian woman with a Sri Lankan partner. No, hello, Adam. We have not gone in. We're going to push through Belgium, and I got put onto is the World War II. So the rhetoric. Marine Le Pen. From all the rhetoric that I've heard, at least mostly translated. I mean, I do hear some things in French and maybe catch a word or two. But she's not her father. Her father was much more. Now, maybe she's just better covering it up. But sometimes children completely reject their parents' views. Sometimes they go harder than their parents' views, and sometimes they go more moderate than their parents' views, though, generally following them. I don't think Marine Le Pen's are some sort of fascist movement that's going to have huge parades in the street and are going to, they may round up and deport a hell of a lot of people. And maybe some of them that currently have French citizenship, I don't know, but, have recent previous citizenship in other nations. I don't yet see the extreme fascist or Nazis really on the rise in Europe. But I have been warning since before I think the AfD really existed as any real force, and before some of these other, the National Rally or whatever it's been called under Le Pen before, I'm forgetting, what is it, Maurice or whatever, his father's, Le Pen's name, I'm just forgetting it right offhand. Yeah, he's been around since the 80s. No, so well before my channel. But I've been warning that if governments do not address the concerns of the people, radicalism on the right, on the left, on some sort of neo radicalism, which may not really align to a right or a left or whatever, will rise. Okay? That's one of the siren calls of my channel. I know some people, because they think I'm out trying, because I talk about realistic likelihoods, think I want it all to happen. Oh, I'm on the right of politics, but that doesn't mean I want to have bad things happen. But as I watch things get worse and worse and worse, I see the far, however far it is, and I don't think in Europe, I don't really see a far right rising. Okay, I don't. I don't see anybody in Germany wanting to put the Kaiser back in power. Of either of the Hohenzollerns or the Habsburgs. I don't see somebody really trying to do Hitler 2.0. I don't Giorgia Meloni is from a actually sort of a pseudo-fascistic party. But I really don't see her, and I know there's a bunch of people that are disappointed from her rhetoric to what she's been doing over immigration. I think the reality is, for Meloni, is that her party is the leading party in a coalition of parties, and even that doesn't have super widespread agreement with the people. Not that that coalition of parties isn't the biggest voting bloc, percentage of voters, but it's various structural elements, and she just got rejected on her plan to reform the judiciary. I don't know if I would have. I don't even really know what the plan was, but so she couldn't even get enough support to win that plebiscite, which is to some degree a plebiscite on her performance. She obviously knows politics is the art of the possible. So her rhetoric may very well be where she wants to be, but maybe she can't quite achieve it with the realities of what's going on at the time. But I don't really see a goose-stepping movement that's going to form a fascist grand council or something and make her or her successor the dictator of Italy. I don't see any of that. So the far right is that. The far left is communism, okay? Now, Keir Starmer and some of his crew seem rather far left to me. Some of them are sort of modern corporatist types that are in the Labour Party too. It's both. But so yeah, the far right isn't just the most right-wing party that's getting elected to seats. No, so I see the rise of a true right, where the CDU CSU in Germany, and I had a professor who was a Danish professor, but his main study, and he had interviewed Helmut Kohl 2 or 3 times, was the study of the CDU CSU. They are just simply center right. So they're still in the center, but they're the center right, not the far right. So the AfD is at most the right, not the far right. And it just, again, these hyperbolic labels that I'm also warning against, because if everybody thinks Giorgia Meloni's far right and AfD is far right, when a real far right party shows up, and if these far right parties are acceptable, well, this other truly far right party is also acceptable. So you use language to try to keep people out of power, but they're going to backfire on you people. They really, really are. So, okay, let me check a lot of the stuff, the chats here, and then I'll get to playing some more. So, I don't know. I haven't answered. I don't have a, because obviously there are people willing to use arbitrary, deadly violence to gain what they want, and not just a few hoods in the few criminals in the hood, however you want to say it, hoodlums or whatever, robbing some liquor stores or bank or whatever to get what they want. We're talking people that can get in charge of societies and have enough power and authority within societies to run them, that are willing to use conquest to achieve their goals. And when you see governments, whether it's Iran, whether it's China, whether it's Venezuela, not trying, but using their power to support people to use violence in other countries outside of their own, even, you cannot wait until they're individually coming up to hit you on the head. You have to respond to them at some point. Do you wait until there's a Pearl Harbor moment for your nation, not just, for your nation, meaning Hitler very much knew that he was gambling, but also very much believed that France and Britain were not going to go to war until they are directly threatened. So expansion to the east, because they did not stand up initially over the Sudetenland, or when he occupies Czechoslovakia, they do not really do anything serious. So he thinks he can get Poland. That obviously is not what happened, but he gambles that. So, do you wait until the tanks are coming across your border before you go to war? Or do you realize, oh shit, we're being attacked, or our proxies are being attacked, so at some point we're going to step in? That that whole category of violence I take is different than like, we just want the Ukraine, we're going after the Ukraine with the Russians. And the Russian people seem to, even with all the drafts and all the kidnapping, the press, that's sort of what it's called, is when you go around and you just round people up to be in your military or your Navy, not like through an organized draft, but just going around and kidnapping people, is going on in Russia. But Putin doesn't seem to be losing power or authority in Russia. And some of my sources say that, the war is still fairly quite popular in Russia. Maybe from their viewpoint, we've got to fight this war because otherwise we'll be dominated by other people and we're the great Russians or whatever. But humanity has not reached the end of history in which we're going to allow negotiations and reasonableness with just a few radical outliers, a North Korea and Iran. But no, China and Russia, they're just reasonable nations that we'll just negotiate with them and they'll see the light of day and blah. No. So a war was inevitable to happen. So future is still alive. Sorry. Isn't that child leader in Bulgaria one featured in Hoi 4 still? I'm not sure. Some of them have died. Okay. No, Exergen, you can point out the reality. There are people in America that say death to America. That's sure. And they're, Americans too, yes. The U.S. was warring with Iran since 1979. How do you explain arms sales to Iran during Iran-Iraq war? Contras, ironically, the UK sold WMD's chemical weapons. Hello, Tubies. Well, I wasn't there personally, but I know people or knew people. I have no contact with them anymore. One of them is still alive. Um, who were literally loading those weapons onto the airplanes that were going to Iran. Okay. And not just met, I mean, knew and spent days, actually worked for one of them, seeing him 5-6 days a week. Um, so I have very close contacts and have talked to some of those people that were directly and literally directly involved in that mission. Now, you have to understand with the Iran-Iraq war, we were definitely supplying intelligence, satellite information and whatnot, to the Iraqis at significant stages during that war. I'm not saying during the whole war or entirely, but good chunk of it, maybe most of the war. What we sold to Iran was one key element: sold. Two, it was in relatively small quantities. It was enough to keep some of their F-14 and other American-based fighters and some of their American-based helicopters flying. Iran, at the time of the Islamic Revolution, they had one of the largest, not larger than the U.S. combined helicopter fleets, but one of the largest helicopter fleets in the world. Basically all American helicopters, I think, but correct me if I'm wrong on I'm not saying an outlier here of one or two aircraft, but I think most all the major types that they were flying were American aircraft. That and of course Obama gives lots of money or frees up money that had been frozen by previous governments, including particularly by Carter's government, that were Iranian assets. I am not saying that the U.S., through the whole period since 79, has been at war with Iran. What I'm saying is, since 79, the Islamic revolutionary movement, because it starts out before it's the government, but becomes the government, has been at war with the U.S. since 79. So meaning, although we may have been paying attention and having spies and satellites and whatever watching the situation, we may not have always been at war with them. Also, the big thing was, well, here's another thing that you also have to realize, Tubies, and I hope you're still around. Iran took a lot of, I forget the number of hostages that they took when they took our embassy, and it's easy to remember, 444 days, 444. Is how long they held those. But after that, they took other American hostages, mostly in Lebanon, mostly by their proxies, but their proxies were controlled by the Iranians, meaning the proxies were doing what the Iranians were telling them to do. And we wanted to get those people out. Now, whether it's the same group of proxies, and I think in some cases it was, but, and again, I don't know how much it's been publicized. I mean, I'm not saying it's written in some book, but I don't know how well it's generally known. But I've had the opportunity to both This is in the pre-internet days. Lecture. Yeah, I've gone to some lectures that 30. I've been able to go. There's 30 or 40 people and being listened to them. Now this guy we give these lectures multiple times, but it wasn't necessarily. Most people. And these were people that were very connected people, not and I know that they meaning that these were people involved with the U.S. government. These aren't just people that are that conspiracy guy with the everything on the cork board, drawing lines between. No, these are actual people that were involved. That not necessarily what they were always telling me or the groups that I had opportunities to listen to was classified information, but these people definitely had access to some classified information. The same or similar groups in Lebanon, meaning because there were so many different factions, so you could prove me wrong if they were the exact same groups if you dug into it, but took some Russian diplomats or other agents and businessmen that they may be trying to set up a business deal somewhere in the Middle East. And Lebanon at the time was, even though the civil war is still going on, was a hub of interactions between groups and people and whatnot. Were taken by some of these people, and then were big demands for for getting them back. Often included some money, but often, freeing some people, or whatever. Well, the Russians had enough intelligence to sort of know who took the the groups, and because they were to some degree self-defense identifying, but know who the members of the groups were and whatnot. So instead of paying, they kidnapped, and these are, because these are, family and clans that are going on very much so there, if you don't realize that. And so I don't know that they were capturing the literal brother or sister of the persons holding the hostages, but they kidnapped a few of the family members and chopped them into pieces and sent them back to them in pieces. And their hostages were released, because that's the way the Russians were going to deal with it. In that the people knew that if you killed our hostage at this point, we're going to get a bunch more of you and chop you into pieces. So you better release, or we're going to keep doing this until you release the hostages. The U.S. just doesn't operate like that. I probably would. When, it's not like, oh, hey, some Belgian terrorist group captures, some radical leftist or radical rightist or whatever terrorist group in Belgium, captures an American citizen or something and holds them for a hostage. And if we sort of kind of think we know, we don't necessarily know where they're being held or whatever. Oh, we know that they have a brother or a cousin. Well, that doesn't mean that they even care about their brother or cousin, because but if you go and chop their family up, they're not necessarily like going to respond, and do what you want them to do, because they don't have this strong clan structure. But in the Middle East, they have this strong clan structure. So if you identify that some members of the clan are doing bad things, it is truly the way to deal with it is put pressure on that whole clan. Because, yeah, this person is willing to die for whatever, but to survive in their society, they need support from that clan. And so I probably would have done more what the Russians were doing. So part of with the Iran-Contra element, part of it was working in attempts to get freed American hostages. Part of it was for money. And you're taking me back, and I'm remembering things I haven't thought about in 30 years. And so I'm sure my memory is faulty, and what was going on and what the world was like back then. And I was, at best, very peripherally involved in all of this stuff. as I think you can tell that I was not nowhere near the core of it, but I do sort of kind of know what was going on a bit more than your average reader of the New York Times or something. And I guess I want to be very clear. I don't want to, and I don't want to specify certain information, but I also don't want to make it sound like I was at the center of all this stuff going on, or I'm somehow whatever. I'm not. I don't overtake, overblow, whatever you want to say, my non-roles, my sort of periphery um, association. I mean, not maybe not even involvement really, but association with some of the people that were involved with some of these things were. So I don't want to overstate that, or somebody you said you were, no I didn't, like involved, or no I'm not saying that. I just sort of know a bit about it, and I could have very well been lied to by the people that, and some of the people I do know from outside documentation, that they were involved. It's not that they were lying to or could lie to me. It's just because some of them were involved in front of Congress. you know, so yeah, it's that I knew. So it's not me just believing somebody telling me a story too. I mean, just somebody. I mean, these people may have been telling me a story, but and I'm sure to some degree, like I'm being cautious with what I'm saying, I'm sure to some degree they were being cautious with what they were saying. Some of the stuff was definitely trying to get funds to do things in to support the Contras, which are the counter-revolutionary movement in Nicaragua and other movements in other places. The U.S. law, or the U.S. Constitution, does not give Congress authority over certain things, but it does give funding authority for these things. Meaning, if you're going to take U.S. taxpayer money and fund the FBI, Congress has authority over those funds, like we're seeing right now over the Department of Homeland Security, and Congress not funding the Department of Homeland Security. But Congress does not control the actions of the FBI. Congress can request, basically subpoena, and they can fight over whether they answer the subpoena or not, but can subpoena or request members of the FBI come and testify before them, and their only requirement is that they don't get lied to. And they do, and it happens. They get lied to. And those people then could be hauled up for perjury. But the FBI could come in and say, oh yes, we've been spying on all of you, on all congressmen, and we listen to everything you say. We have video cameras in all of your rooms and all of your homes, and we're downloading everything you see on the computer and everything you watch, and we catalog it. We know where you move every single second of the day. Have a good day, Congress. Congress say, you must not do that. So what are you going to do? Defund us? Because that's your only option, Congress. And that literally is their only option, is to defund them. So, if the U.S. government can get funds from another source, which could be, this is a clever one, is, hey, Doctors Without Borders. We want to fund Doctors Without Borders. Let's give them $50 million. And then somebody goes to Doctors Without Borders. Hey, give me $10 million. Wait, what? Well, you want to have that funding. We'll hold that funding up, or we'll expose some stuff about Doctors Without Borders, or we'll cut you off. You give us $10 million. We can't just do that. Well, no, donate $10 million to this other organization. Nurses Without Borders or something. It's a foreign organization, yes, that you're funding. Oh, okay. And then that Nurses Without Borders may just very well be almost a pure front organization. That now that money is now lost in the myriad of stuff. Now this has mostly come up because back in the Reagan days, there were virtually no funding for NGOs back then. This is really sort of, I think, a Clinton started era thing, if I remember correctly. Governments funding NGOs at scale. So is a non-governmental organization a non-governmental organization if it primarily gets its funds from a government? Primarily, I'm not saying they don't do fundraising on their own or something, but gets a more than 50% of their funding from a government. So the Iran-Contra also was an attempt to get money to do things that Congress didn't want to approve, because the Congress was held, particularly the House of Representatives, and I remember back then my professors were telling me that Congress is always going to be Democrat because it's the people. It's the state. The Senate might go Republican because you get small states like Wyoming with very little populace, but are filled with Republicans. So they get 2 senators, but only like 3 congressmen, and so many more congressmen in populous Democratic areas, and they're always going to win. And well, now we see the Democrats having a hard time getting winning the House of Representatives, but they might squeak out a victory in this coming year. Might. I know some people are. It always happens. Well, it mostly happens, but every election's its own thing. Trends are a thing, but so is every election its own thing. So Iran-Contra was both about dealing with and I will say most of the time, not the taking of the embassy, most of the time Iran's war with the U.S. is an indirect war. They're using proxies. They're not, launching made in Iran missiles towards the U.S. base. They're doing that now, but most of the time it wasn't that. They were always trying to attack us deniably, even though we all knew who was attacking us, but not trying to force a reluctant Congress who for various reasons do not want to be involved with a war with Iran, to give them an excuse not to go to war with Iran. That's my story. I'm sticking to it, and I think it's true. Okay, Heavenly Spirit of Psalms. So they're saying Republican Party caused war than Democrats. Oh, well, historically, the Democrats have gotten us into many more wars, many more than the Republicans. The Democrats have always been the war party. Prior to Carter, it was for various other reasons. Post-Carter, it was like with Clinton, it was, we're going to war with, not Somalia, the government was basically gone, but we're going to war with certain factions in Somalia to deliver food. It's really the war party in America has been traditionally the Democrat Party. It was only the Cold War gets the Republicans involved, or at scale involved, and willing to support wars overseas against nations who have not directly attacked the United States. And please listen to my language carefully. So, it was under Truman that you had the Korean War. It was under Kennedy and LBJ that we had the Vietnam War. Nixon, the Republican, he gets elected to get us out of that war. With Reagan, you invade fucking Grenada. How many hours does that war last? I mean, not even like a day. It's like um, part of the UN peacekeeping force into Lebanon. Yeah, he gets us sort of a localized quagmire, gets us into that shit show. Sure. But that isn't really even the U.S. going to war. That's the U.S. trying to be peacekeepers or peace enforcers or whatever. We weren't. There's virtually no oil in Lebanon. It was a fucking torn apart civil war country. We were there to, and I know because of Israel. Well, sort of in a way. If you know what, and I'll get to some of the stuff. I know this is a lot of history that most people don't know. There's still a lot of Palestinians living in Lebanon. I don't quite know the numbers, but there used to be even a lot more. Lebanon traditionally had been a slight Christian majority country. I think it's become a Muslim majority country, but it's always been a split country. Early on, even the Christians wanted to crush, because it's more Arab solidarity, wanted to crush Israel. But once in 75, I believe that's when the civil war breaks out in Lebanon. Once it breaks out, between various factions, but the big is sort of Christian versus Muslim, but it's more than just that. Because otherwise the Muslims would have overrun the Christians, but they were also fighting each other too, the different Muslim factions. Israel supporting the Christian factions, two main ones. But when Israel launches an invasion of Lebanon because of, again, many attacks against it over the time, they invade up into Lebanon and up into Beirut. They secure one or more Palestinian, the Palestinians are one of the factions in the Lebanese civil war. Some of these, refugee camps or and some say camps. Sometimes there's high-rise buildings in the middle of them. But it's Palestinian controlled, and the Israelis have secured at least the heavy equipment of the Palestinians in those areas, and some of the PLO, PFLP, PLA type fighters. I used to remember all the letter salads of all these groups and other various factions within the Palestinian movement. So I'm dredging back in my history, guys. A lot of their fighting forces have to retreat with the Israeli push-up there. So there's one or more of these camps, but think areas and neighborhoods, if you will, a little bit more, because they had been around for 20 years or something. Well, the Israeli army secures it and then withdraws from one or more of these camps, but I forget the names. I sort of on the tip of my tongue, and I don't know if I'm just thinking of another name, and they then figuratively turn their backs on the camp and allow one of the Christian militias to go in and kill everybody. And I mean everybody. Okay. Of every age, from infant to old people, just kill everybody. The Christian militias and these Christian militias have lost many family members and whatnot over the years of the war. This is like an 86, was it? Or is it 84? I forget what year it was. I'm not good at remembering what year it was. The war had been going on for 10 years or more and lost lots of people. And so and the Palestinians are seen as, even worse than in the Civil War, is seen as foreigners occupying their country. So they go in and kill everybody. And this, of course, gets international outrage. The Jews didn't do it. The Christians did. But the Jews allowed it and maybe even requested it to happen. So because of this is why there is an international, with the U.S. always being forced to be the biggest one, puts the troops into Lebanon. particularly into Beirut. And that because they're there and they're being shot at, they shoot back. So they're in essence being drawn into the local civil war, and they're helping out the Christians, the Israelis, and the Druze, and a few maybe a bit more moderate Arab type factions within it. But the Iranians are poking them, and that's when the Iranians set up the truck bomb to go in and kill, what is it, 182 or something American Marines, and wound a lot more. Some of them, losing arms and legs and that kind of thing, and all of that. So yeah, the Republicans, and what did George Bush the elder do? Oh, Noriega, yeah, had been an American puppet, but went off the rails, kidnapped some Americans. Yeah, we went in on, what was it, Just Cause or something, and how many hours was that war? And brief occupation, and then we pulled out. Yeah, it's the Democrats who go to war mostly for the U.S. Because the war, if you will, and we're getting away from truly declared wars, but the war that we fought with Venezuela, again, what was that? How many minutes was that war? I do mean sort of how many minutes. Maybe it was an hour or two, but I don't know if it made it more than a 2-hour action. So it's really the Democrats who historically, the one big war that we can clearly put at Republicans' feet is the Civil War, and that's Lincoln. So let's see. The problem is I can't agree with you. Okay, because they should have got UN support. Otherwise, it looks like the same on paper. Okay, well, Exergen, I hear you. And I'm thinking on how best to respond to this. When you have Russia and China sitting on the Security Council of the UN, you're never going to get UN support. Okay? So what you're saying is you can never do the action. Okay? I mean, flat out. And all the little countries out there that Upper Volta gets a vote. And Myanmar, who's in like a 10-way civil war right now, whoever delegate that gets to go from whatever faction of the government of Myanmar or Burma or whatever you want to call it, gets a vote on that UN. You think any of those people are going to, or a majority of them are going to, if we call a general vote, and they know that they could be next? No, we're never going to get UN support anymore. UN support is dead. It is a dead issue. The UN, when the UN puts, it's a rotating thing. Yeah, when the UN puts Iran as the chair of the, I'm sure it's a man, the chairman of the council or whatever you want to call it for women's rights. So Iran, who women have to wear a burqa, is chairing the women's rights. So you have an organization that not only allows Iran to be in the thing, allows Iran to, at least as figurehead. I mean, they may not have the majority of votes because, again, it's rotating or something. No, to me, I would get rid of the UN. The UN is part of the fiction of the past. It is not a real organization. When China signs treaties like the UNCLOS, the UN Treaty on Laws of the Ocean or whatever, or seas or whatever, signs it, and so they're a UN member, and they've signed it, and they're blatantly breaking the treaty. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm sorry, UN support. And you're right. It doesn't look good. If I was the U.S., I think we basically are ending all real funding of the UN, and the UN is like panicking. Um, if I were the president right now, and I don't know that I'd be a good president, but if I were the president, I would withdraw from the UN and I would revoke every single UN diplomat, every single UN employee that is not an American citizen, their ability to be in the United States. Just go, oh, you're the UN ambassador from Yemen. Oh, and you're the staff of the ambassador from Yemen. Bye-bye. Just everybody gone. I know that might signal the end of Pax Americana, the American peace or whatever. The UN can go reform in some other nation where they want to, but I would leave it so that there isn't, well, you didn't get UN support. Well, the UN is meaningless. And I don't know if the UN sets up whatever they set up, whether I would send a delegation to it. I might, just so we're there. But I cannot see in a practical sense that having China and Russia right now on the Security Council of the UN, when Russia is attacking Ukraine and China, they've recently damaged a Filipino vessel, is attacking the Philippines out at sea. You know, they're not bombing Manila or something, but they're attacking the Philippines out at sea. And inside, not just in the EEZ, but inside UN acknowledged territorial waters, and including some UN acknowledged land territory, small islands, mostly uninhabited, true, but that are UN recognized, that are Filipino territory, that the UN is doing nothing about, I think nothing about, and if they're doing anything about, it's a strongly worded letter of condemnation. So this Security Council is a dead, done issue. And why the fuck is England or Britain on the Security Council, or the United Kingdom, or whatever I should say? What do they have to say about the fucking world? Can you get a ship out at sea? I mean, maybe a rowboat. France, they actually can get a few ships to sea, so they sort of kind of matter, Right now, if the Argentine army was to invade, the biggest problem right now for Argentina to invade the Falklands exertion is probably halfway to the Falklands. The Argentines would be informed that they now own the Falklands by Keir Starmer. So I don't think that there's any chance Keir Starmer would defend the Falklands. I think, in fact, if he thought it was to be invaded, he would immediately give up the territory to the rightful owners of the Maldives. So why is even England on the Security Council? Poland maybe should be there because they got a bigger army and whatnot, and so that's all. That's just that. Okay, and I'm sorry I'm getting everybody's chat here slowly, but I am. Me and my political science class agreed that Trump is doing unconstitutional as Congress has not declared war. Okay, Heavenly Spirit of Psalms. That your political science class is ill-informed of current U.S. law. The power to declare war is in the Senate, specifically. The Senate and the House of Representatives have granted the President of the United States 90 days to do military action. After 90 days, and I'm sure I'm butchering this in a little bit, but after 90 days, the President needs to come and get approval for his continuing actions. So after 90 days, and we haven't been at it for 3 months yet, after 90 days, then it's up to the U.S. Congress to approve continuing actions. Because I remember this back in the days of Reagan and dealing mostly with, like I was talking about earlier, the Lebanon situation. Is so the U.S. president has 90 days to do what it wants with his military. At any moment, the U.S. Congress can withdraw that authority by removing that law. Now, it might take a supermajority in that if it's just a bare majority, the president can veto the change in law. So if you just barely get enough votes in either the House or the Senate, because it needs to override the veto in both, if he just barely gets a majority to remove that law, well, the president can veto it. But if there's an overwhelming majority, meaning if they're actually speaking for, overwhelming, not just the Republicans or not just the Democrats or not just the Republicans and, a couple of Democrats or the Democrats and a couple of Republicans, but if they're really speaking for the American people, they can override his veto and withdraw that law. So if the American people or the American Congress wants to get rid of that, because the American people can put enough pressure on Congress still to this day to actually get something done, and or particularly in the House of Representatives, fire them all every 2 years. So I would say, as far as I understand the Constitution of the United States, Trump has 90 days to do what he wants with the military. But do realize that the United States, and you can tell your political science, Heavenly Spirit class, the United States has not been at war since 1945, and it has not declared war since, I think, 1943. I know I almost lost a friend when I said that who was currently in the Army. What you think? No, he didn't even want to let me explain what I want to say, because we have been in wars. Our soldiers have been in wars. The United States has not been at war, because once we go to war as the United States, we start mobilizing things. The government doesn't necessarily take over ownership, but they go, hey, you, Winchester, you start making M16 rifles. Hey, you semiconductor company, you don't care what your orders are. You start making us chips to go in our drones. We start telling our entire industry to start doing things. That's what happens when the United States goes to war. I know no one of any power actually listens to me, but out there, you do not want the U.S. to go to war ever again. Do not make the United States people as angry as you did on December 7th, 1941, so that the U.S. actually goes to war. Keep it just limited military actions. So, and yes, just watching The Patriot, Exurgent, and Gettysburg is next. Painting ACW minis. Yes. Oh, yes. And Exurgent, a free Exurgent, but I know him as Exurgent for many years. He's an old friend. We disagree on issues for sure, but he's an old friend. Has recently posted on our Discord server. I wish Arno was here to post again. If somebody wants to share a link, they can. Is a world-class level miniatures painter. And he's been sharing some photos that he's done of some German World War II figures. But he, like I say, I'm not saying he's the best in the world, but he is world-class level of miniatures painting. Not just sloppy things like I did for my Jacobite and Hanoverian government 25 millimeter figures of just for wargaming. No, he might play war games with his figures, but his are literally art level work on the scale. So just sort of a plug for him, as well as a plug for our the Yamato. Yes, thank you, Heavenly Spirit. That's what I'm going to call you. Yes, breaking Article 1, Section 8, War Powers. But that's the Constitution. And now you can try to find, I forget, it was over the Gulf of Tonkin and some others. I'm sorry, I just, in my head, I remember things, but I don't remember like all the details of, articles or the laws passed. But it's the Senate that has the war powers.
but it was both the Senate and the House passed the law that granted the president 90 days of military action before he has to come. What about Japan could secure ally with Siam? Historically, or in this game, I'm not sure. I'm not really paying much attention to Asia. Why? We won because the Germans wore out. Why? I don't. World War II, World War I, not sure, but yes. World War II could start with the Middle East conflict or another Balkans war. The Soviet Union could try to invade the Caucasus. They sort of owned the Caucasus. Maybe you meant the Balkans? I don't know. You did say another Balkans war. You mean invade down here? Oh, yeah. Well, this is if we're looking at, is World War II inevitable? No, I do not think Hitler's rise to power is inevitable. Like I say, I've looked at it closely. Had Hitler been assassinated, had he been put in prison for 10 years, not just his year or so in actual prison, where he, mostly dictates to Rudolf Hess' Mein Kampf. Had he really been, kept from being in action long enough, had he been assassinated, had he died during the putsch, there are many incidences prior to getting to power that would have, in my opinion, kept the Nazis from really gaining power. So that Germany starts a World War II, I don't think is inevitable. But we do also see the very, very aggressive Japan. Now, Japan is not going to attack Britain, the Dutch, because they're, in essence, to some degree, a British protectorate. To some degree, very much so by the time they actually do attack, because the Netherlands have been conquered. And, of course, the Americans are out there. They're not going to attack those nations without those nations being, in the Dutch case, conquered, at home by the Germans, or the British deeply involved in a war in Europe. And yeah, because if it looks like there would be an Anglo-American alliance, and you have to realize there is no reason whatsoever for the Japanese to attack the Americans, listen carefully, if you're not going to be attacking the British and the Dutch. They could use the rubber, for sure. But what they really need is the Dutch oil. And I don't think... Now, we can look at, what the British do or don't do over, Czechoslovakia, but obviously they got a war over Poland. I don't think the British are just going to allow the Japanese to, swallow up the Dutch colonies and just sit back there and watch. And the British fleet is, at that time, the greatest fleet on the planet. Now, it's spread all over the place, and definitely by the time Japan attacks, it's all involved out in the Atlantic, and there's just the Prince of Wales and the Repulse, was it, or something that was out here that was sunk. There was just a token force out in the Far East. There were some others out in, the Indian Ocean, but most of it was either in the Mediterranean or, the North Atlantic, or maybe hunting, some Germans down here in the South Atlantic or whatever, the Graf Spee or something. But, it depends on what date and time and whatnot that we're looking at. But, so Japan can't really attack America to get the steel or the oil from America, because both of those things are well beyond Japan's military grasp. And I don't, the Japanese mindset, and I've gone into this in much more detail, was really looking at the Russo-Japanese War and seeing that once they defeated the Russian fleet, the Russians were willing to negotiate a peace settlement. Japanese didn't get maybe all that they wanted. I mean, they got Port Arthur or whatever you want to call it down here, but they did not get Vladivostok or some of the other positions that they, like they didn't get all of Sakhalin Island. Half of it, yes, approximately. But they didn't get everything they wanted. They thought if they could sink the American fleet, that they could then negotiate, which maybe at that point, and also take the Philippines, return the Philippines to American control, have a peace settlement. Well, Yamamoto didn't think that that was what was going to happen because he knew Americans. Like I say, he spent a year on his own or more wandering around the United States, known for his poker playing ability. And he definitely knew, and he made some sort of comment like that that's been recorded, that we've lost. Once he finds out that his Pearl Harbor attack happened prior to formal notification of being at war, he had hoped that the attack, or that they would notify them out in Washington that they were at war, and then a few hours later, before they could get effective word, or before they thought that they could catch the Americans before they would leave, like, oh my God, we're at war. Okay, everybody, on alert. Okay, we're all on alert. Okay, let's see, what are we going to do? We got to get our Navy out and get what's going to be our plan, and it's going to take a few days. And then he was, he was trying to do it more or less within hours. But, he thought it was going to take a little while to get that fleet out. And he was attacking on a Sunday in which, a good chunk, the carriers, is it just random happenstance? I know people will believe that, and I could believe that too, but is it God somehow inspired the carriers to go do exercises on the weekend when they normally didn't? Or was it some sort of time traveler that whispered in somebody's ear, get the carriers out to sea, you'll need to do that. Why? Just do it. Okay. Whatever it was, getting those carriers out, didn't, America would have just said, oh, you sunk all of our carriers, we're going to build 100 more, because they did build 100 carriers. Had 100 carriers, and they were building more carriers still. They had 100 carriers in operation, basically, or maybe 98 or 99 or something, but to define what some of the carriers were, at 1945 when Japan surrendered. So we got to 100 carriers. Not all fleet carriers by any means, but 100 carriers. So yeah, we were going to build anyways, but he realizes, because he knows Americans enough, he studied enough American history, realizes, looking at, and I'm sure he looked at a little bit World War I, I'm sure, especially naval operations, but also looking at the Spanish-American War and the American Civil War, he knew Americans were very ready for the fight. But we're not looking for world conquest. Conquest of the North American continent, absolutely. But conquest of the world, no. Maybe we want a Guam and we want a, Diego Garcia, places around the world that are small populations. But America, and still to this day, is not interested in conquering the world. The North American continent, yes. Hi, Canada. We love you, Canada. We want you to join us. It's you that don't like us. We want you to join us. We want you to become us. And I'm not joking. And I'm not saying this is what I want. I'm saying this is what America wants. We've tried before. We'll try again to get Canada. It's just part of our American psyche. For good or for bad. It is. So Yamamoto knows the war is lost. Because it's December 8th when he attacked. It's still 7th in Pearl Harbor, but dateline and they're on the Japanese calendar on, whatever, December 9th, December 10th, or whatever, when he actually does hear that the U.S. had not known that they were at war when he attacked. He knew the war was lost at that, and Japan was lost at that point. Did his best, but he knew it was lost. And so, there's a lot of things that, so Japan wouldn't start a world war. They'd start a war with China. Like you say, Balkans, the Soviets were definitely on the aggressive actions. So, yes, okay. Let's see, if a fascist in charge of America, we would start World War II ourselves to expand to Mexico and Central America. No, I do not believe so. I do not believe so. I come from California. I'm right now living in Arizona. That's what I just said. I'm a Southwest American. These states, I don't know if these two states were ever majority Mexican. Ever. There's lots of Indians that were living in these regions. And there were very few Spanish. And then about 20 or 30 years or something, these territories were Mexican. So, if you're only like 20 years, still a lot of people are alive that were not born Mexicans. They were born Spanish, colonials, and they may be mestizo, as in a mix of Spanish and Indian, or we'll use the term pure blood Spanish. And there were those there too. And so they never had necessarily any great allegiance to the Mexican flag. If you grew up with the Spanish flag, and then and for maybe good reason, want to go independent from way off Madrid, yeah, sure, but that doesn't mean you're some diehard Mexican nationalist. When the Americans take over, and then the Americans flood in, the Anglo-Americans flood into particularly California, and trust me, the Mexican population of Arizona at the time was minuscule. It was very, very frontier. And so I'm saying, I may be wrong, but I'm saying there were more Indians at the time of the United States acquiring Arizona than there were Mexicans in Arizona at the time. And there was, the U.S. did want, but the guy negotiating got the wrong signals or something and whatnot, so he did not get Baja. Up here, especially in the northern part of this and the northern part of this, the only reason today that there's people along here, and they've all come since, or great majority of them, like 80% of the people that have come up along here have come since the 1990s and the NAFTA agreement for trade with the U.S. This is where the population density of Mexico City. The United States is not interested in acquiring large numbers of non-Anglos. Okay? We are at core an Anglo nation. We are at core wanting people, and we call them things like Polish Americans, Italian Americans, German Americans, which means that these people, the German Americans predate American independence. The Pennsylvania Dutch, they're not Dutch, they're Deutsch, the Pennsylvania Germans. They were there, prior to independence. The Louisiana French, they were there prior to the territory becoming U.S. territory. Yeah, so, but these people are mostly that have come in the 19th century, the Poles, the Italians, the Germans, the whoever, even the Chinese, and there were massive laws against how many, the amount and types of Chinese coming in, were to be Americanized, which is a type of Anglification. You got to learn English. You got to understand our social norms. Don't, understand this. The U.S. is not interested in annexing central Mexico. It is not interested in annexing Cuba. Oh, I know the Golden Circle and the Confederates wanting to, even before the Confederacy formed, wanted to get slave states down here to counterbalance free states up there. But that's not even the majority of people. That was just a few nut jobs, really. America is not interested in directly ruling Latin America. That is, in my opinion, very much the thing. Take France out? No, yet. Jean-Marie Le Pen, yes. Thank you, Guillaume LaRoche, thank you. I forget some of these things. My head gets, I think partially literally too full of facts that I can't call everything up, plus other elements. Speaking of politics, now can we talk about the far center? Okay, yeah, I don't know far center. That isn't. The dead center might be a thing. Why didn't Hitler go through Greece, Bulgaria area, through Hungary and Romania? Hitler was uninterested. You and I'm not going to go all into it. You can look at a lot of my. I don't know if somebody ever wants to go through and cut out where I do deep dives on things, particularly on some of my Hearts of Iron 3 videos, where I do very much go into the various, and it is various different elements of the National Socialist ideologies. But in short, you do have people that are like Himmler, who wants to see a pan-Germanic nation that rules over subjected peoples. So he wants to have places like Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and maybe England or whatever, but places he considers Germanic, and he wants to rule over lesser peoples. Establish a racial feudalism type society. Hitler and his crew, he wants to set up regions that were exclusively German. Hitler is fine with supporting Quisling up in Norway. And not just in my opinion, and somebody could do a deeper dive on Hitler and Quisling and whatever, not just because Quisling is a useful puppet, but he has no real, in my understanding, has no real problem, because Quisling is an ultra-nationalist, whether for Norway or for Scandinavianism, all of them together. I don't really know enough about Quisling to go with that. I know Quisling is the traitor and all that, and it becomes in the English language a term for adds Quisling to also being a Benedict Arnold traitor. But Benedict Arnold is a bit more American focused, who I think there's still a statue up in Parliament or outside of Parliament to General Benedict Arnold. I think there was. I don't know. They've torn down so many statues over there. I don't know. But Benedict Arnold had been something of a hero to the British. But to the Americans, no. But enters into the general English language, including England, Quisling as a traitor. But he is an arch nationalist. He hates Himmler. He hates the Norwegian SS. He works through his whole time there to try to stop German influence, particularly Himmler's influence, into Norway. He wants to build Norway, and maybe, I don't know whether he's just looking pure Norway, I just don't know this, or whether he wants to add Sweden and Denmark and whatnot, in Iceland and whatever, as Scandinavian, as an ultra-nationalist, powerful Scandinavian bloc to be above Germany in the geographical sense, but allied with Germany, and probably shares a lot of the racial bullshit that Hitler does. But he's looking at that, where Himmler's looking at incorporating all this into the Greater Reich, where Hitler wants to have more pure Germanism. Because you got to remember, Hitler is not German. Hitler comes from Austria. Hitler, particularly, he's like some border town, but he spends a good 10 years or something in Vienna, which is the capital of a multicultural empire. So you get within the capital, maybe not in the general countryside or the smaller, but still big cities, but smaller than Vienna. But in Vienna, you get a real mix of people from all over the empire. You get Czechs or Bohemians or whatever you want to call them. You get Slovaks, you get Hungarians, you get Croats, you get whatever the hell. And he hates this. He hates the Habsburg regime, but he likes the Hohenzollern regime, the establishment, because he sees the Habsburgs as being internationalists, being multiculturalists, which they are, And he hates that. So this is what he's experienced and he hates. When he wants to move east, he wants to depopulate, whether immediately or gradually, where Himmler wants to rule over the locals and have the Germans as sort of a master race over the local peoples. He wants to exclude them. So within their ideology, Hitler sees Slavics as, I know the term is often used as subhuman, but maybe, which is maybe just another way of saying it, but lesser humans than the master race. Still humans, but lesser. But particularly lesser. Now, the Franks and the Gauls, which are two different groups, the Franks are Germanic people. The Anglo-Saxons, obviously, are Germanic people. The Gauls, the Gaels, often call them Gaels up here in Scotland and Ireland, and the Gauls down here, which the Gaul, but you can all see the Celtic roots. He sees, Himmler and Hitler sees these people more or less on par, the Celts, more or less on par with the Germans, but they're not Germans. So Himmler wants to incorporate these people as part of the Greater Reich, maybe. Hitler, no. France can exist. Hitler isn't trying to erase France. France can exist. He wants to get back borders and suck it, France. We won this. We won this round. We won the Franco-Prussian War. Whether he wants to think about previous wars that Prussia or Austria fought with France or whatever, but definitely we won the Franco-Prussian War. We kicked your butts. You kicked ours in World War I. We're going to kick it in World War II. He's not trying to erase France. He's trying to erase Poland, erase Ukraine as something, other than just a geographical area that Germans are going to occupy. He's not really pushing to go down into here. Italy, Mussolini wants to recreate the Roman Empire in some fashion or another. Yes. But Hitler is just not ideologically interested in conquering it. It's down here is just geopolitics. Can it help me? Can it hurt me? What's going on? So that's what's going on. Schizo rambling. Hello, WQ. Yes, of course. Rambling, I'm speaking of life and Earth, especially international and regional politics can be so messed up. Absolutely. What about NATO, though? Well, the U.S. and NATO. Well, NATO is becoming irrelevant for the U.S. Now, during Biden's administration, because of Trump's administration once, they passed a law that says that the president, doesn't say Trump, but it means Trump. The president cannot unilaterally withdraw from NATO. I don't think that, from other treaties, but from NATO. That doesn't mean the U.S. can't withdraw from NATO in a practical sense, meaning stop giving money and move all the troops out, because the president has control of. Congress does not have control over where U.S. troops are. Okay. The Congress can stop funding U.S. troops or allowing funds to be used maybe for a particular purpose. But the U.S. Congress does not approve where a president deploys a squadron, deploys a ship, deploys an army unit. Now, they may control where U.S. bases are in the U.S., and whatnot, and as Congress often funds over funding for the base. But the base can sit there and the president can withdraw all military forces from that base and just let it be a ghost town, or it can double the size of troops at a particular base. Congress doesn't control this. So the president can basically order home all of the U.S. forces in NATO. And what's the purpose of NATO now for the U.S.? Seriously, what's the purpose of NATO for the U.S. now? It was as the Warsaw Pact is billed by the Warsaw Pact and the Soviets as being a defensive agreement because it actually forms after NATO. But we're seeing a de facto Warsaw Pact prior to NATO's formation. NATO was always to counter Soviet aggression. what does it matter to the U.S.? And I'm serious, and I will catch up with the chat. We're getting there. What does it matter to the U.S. geopolitically whether the Ukraine, and I went deliberately back to the Ukraine as a region, not as Ukraine the nation. What does it matter if the Ukraine is Russian-controlled or independent or part of the EU? I mean, it may not be good for the U.S. if Ukraine is part of the EU because the EU is getting too big. What does it matter to the U.S. about the control of Ukraine? Now, what it does matter is that if you don't stop an aggressor, you can look at Napoleon outside. Hitler is ideologically driven to move east. Napoleon isn't. Napoleon forms the greatest army that has ever been seen to that date on this earth. The greatest army ever. And he wants to take out his implacable foe. We could argue whether his implacable foe is really the sea, but he sees it as the British Empire. So he gets the army, the Grande Armée, hanging out right about here. Gets a lot of barges built. I mean, huge numbers of barges built. And then he sets up to have the French Navy, because it's all in a bunch of little ports everywhere, start forming up together, combines up with the Spanish Navy, comes over to the Americas, deals some stuff over here, and then is coming back to try to take control of the channel because there's a British fleet up here, but is being chased by Nelson's fleet all around and eventually gets sunk down here. I mean, they're trying to get back up here, but gets sunk down here. The Battle of Trafalgar. So Napoleon's like, oh shit! I've created the greatest instrument of war on the planet for on land, and I can't use it for the invasion of England. Well, what the hell am I going to do with this thing? So he decides to attack Russia. I mean, it's basically, I know I'm oversimplifying it, but it's basically that simple. He even gets the Austrians and the Spaniards to come along with the invasion of Russia. He gets, which the Spaniards had been an ally, will eventually become an implacable enemy. The Austrians had been an occasional, fighting multiple wars with Napoleon and revolutionary France and losing. And so they, not really a puppet, but it's more like, hey, you better supply us with some troops, or we're going to do bad things to you kind of thing. And so he invades Russia because he thinks he can do it. He thinks, hey, if I take the capital, the enemy is going to have to fight for it, and I'll defeat their army. Well, no, they just go, hey, we'll burn the capital and have fun in the Russian winter without any food or water or whatever, because everything's going to be froze up, because it is also a struggle for water. Hey, if you burn down the whole city, you can't find anything to heat fire or heat water up with to melt it to be able to drink. So his army has to march home, and it's being, killed all the way along the line, and it's just like a 10% remnant or something that makes it out. And then he raises a new one and fights the Battle of Nations and whatnot in Germany when trying to that, and loses that eventually too. But so aggressors, truly inherent dictator aggressors, and Trump isn't a dictator, people. When the U.S. Supreme Court says something is unconstitutional, you can't do it, Trump obeys that. Dictators wouldn't, okay? I know there's lots of rhetoric around, but Trump is not a dictator. Even when a lower court says not to do something, Trump may or may not do it, but always, will appeal it to higher levels of courts and often gets things overturned quickly. But yeah, so Trump is not a dictator. So what is NATO's purpose for the U.S. now? And I'll get down and see if anybody's posted anything. Oh, well, it helps, German bases allow us to deploy troops to some other parts of the world. Well, if we're withdrawing from these, If the U.S. is just going to worry about this part of the world, I'm trying to not have Africa there, but this part of the world, to defend, and I am intentionally including out here the Pacific, if we're just this part of the world, what do we need NATO for? If our biggest threat is here is China, what do we need NATO for? I'm serious. What do we need NATO for? And since NATO has done such a massive build down of forces, so yeah, the US president, because of the law, Trump cannot actually leave the treaty. Because again, treaties are ratified by the Senate. So when I think it was Obama got us into that sort of net zero treaty, the Paris Accords, that's right, the Paris Accords. The U.S. Senate has never ratified that. So the U.S. is actually, although the president signed it, it takes ratification to actually be a legal document for the U.S., for the Senate to ratify it. The Senate will not, never would, ratify the Paris Accords. So a president can decide to go along with the Paris Accords, but they're not treaty bound by it. So the president can decide to withdraw from NATO and go, so what? We're a member of NATO. Yeah, great. Congress, we're a member. Yeah, we're a member. Yeah, we're hanging out over here. We're all of our troops in the U.S. So please explain to me what benefits. I'm not saying it doesn't get any benefits, but I'd like to hear you guys benefits. What benefits? Now, people say Trump wants to get some NATO partners to not attack Iran, but to escort and keep clear, do mine clearing and whatever for the Straits of Hormuz. So he's not asking for Britain or France to put troops on the ground or fly attack missions over Iran. He's just saying, hey, escort some ships. Have your ships anti-air elements shoot down any flying drones shoot down any fast boats. If somebody's out there laying mines, shoot them, as you go by, and you do mine sweeping. That's all he's asking for. No, but they're not required to do it. No, they're not required to do it because they're not required under the treaty. He's asking for support. And either they're unwilling and or incapable of doing it, depending on the nation. So, and I could definitely see the keeping the sea lanes open as being sort of a peacekeeping element. It's definitely a defensive element, not an offensive element. So he's not asking, there very well may be some sailors from Denmark that get killed if their minesweeper gets attacked by something. Yeah, but he's not asking for Denmark or whoever to go to war with Iran. He's just saying, hey, you know what? If you're just sailing your warships in and out of the Straits of Hormuz, coordinated with ships, maybe nobody will attack you. Maybe your entire operation will be entirely peaceful. We're not asking you to launch any single attack against Iran. We're just saying go through and defend. And if there's no attacks, well then your defense is just, is a passive defense in that you're not having to actively shoot at somebody. And you're just going back and forth through there. Just do that, guys. Can you just do that for us? Give us a solid, just escort neutral shipping in and out of the, Gulf of Persia, Gulf of Persia, Persian Gulf. Just do that. And they can't or they won't. So if NATO, so it's not even like asking that NATO join every war that America goes into. It's just like, hey, there's this one strait here. It's very narrow. You, as well as places like China and Japan, rely upon oil coming in and out and other things coming in and out. Do some escort missions, guys. And you're saying no. For whatever reasons. Some of it may be Trump hatred. Some of it may be afraid of, if they start doing this, they'll start seeing their Islamic populations in France and in Britain rise up and, kill hundreds or thousands of people. I don't know. I don't know why, or if it's just shit. both our carriers are broke. The ship we were supposed to send to Cyprus, we literally can't get it out of the shipyard. You know, the captain of the ship will resign or something if you order me out, because I know my ship will sink halfway there or whatever. So I don't know whether it's incapable or fear or whatever, but I can't, you know. I think right now Russia might be willing to escort vessels if they thought they could. China might be willing to if they thought they could. But, you know, it's... So what's the point of NATO right now for this? Circling back to Hoi 4, what's your current faction statistics? I don't know, and we're mostly just Germany. I mean, we got Austria, or not Austria, but Hungary and Romania. You saw the High 4 reality called Kaiserreich Universe Second. It was different. Yes. Oh, yes. No, the Kaiserreich is a weird and wacky world. Okay. Excess of 150 carriers if you could count escort versions. Well, I believe it's 100, and that's definitely counting escort carriers. I believe it's just 100. Hello, Real Leader 120. What are your plans? My plans are to talk a little bit more and then end the thing. We didn't get very much playing done. I know I got distracted. You guys distract me more than I distract myself. We're planning on getting ready and do an invasion across Belgium, which will outflank all these French forces, take Paris, conquer France, secure their set up a Vichy France. Generally speaking, not have any action in the Mediterranean. I have not allowed Italy to join the Axis, although it is at war with Greece here. So I'm hoping to keep Italy out of the greater war, because it is not in our faction. I'm not planning on putting any squeeze on Yugoslavia. I don't know if Bulgaria will join or not, but I don't really care that much. The biggest thing I care about is Romania defending the border with Bulgaria. I think that's stupid. Go defend this border here with the Soviet Union. But once I get done with the France, probably leaving Britain because I'm not build a surface navy, and then try to do a war with the Soviet Union. And hopefully America will stay out of this, but I don't know if it could happen. Okay. Enterprise was due in Pearl Harbor the 6th, but Halsey had to pause to refuel DDs. Lexington was off to deliver aircraft off the base, yes. Discussions. Hello, discussions, Naz. Security threat. Russia control the UK would give its strategic base close to the US allies in Europe, weakening NATO. Okay, well, I realistically don't think Russia is ever going to control... That would be different than the Soviet Union, because there's a different component there. Is going to control the United Kingdom. I doubt Russia could get anything more than the former Warsaw Pact, but without Germany, because I don't think Germany is going to allow itself to be divided again. It might be able to crush something like Poland and Hungary and Romania, Baltic states, but eventually I think it'll be stopped. That does make Russia a big dominant power again, maybe, but I don't, you can have a Western European power, and you can have a Russian power, and you can have a Chinese power. Divide and rule. I don't think Russia, I don't think China, I don't think something of a united Europe. I don't think any of those are going to be world dominant. I think they may be regional dominant, but I don't think they'll be world dominant. Looking back at World War I, Britain had a policy of a divided Europe. Britain saw, particularly Austria, rising up as a power to dominate Europe, and was very pleased when the Habsburgs lose Spain, but the Bourbons, not France, but the Bourbon monarchy of France, gets to be on the throne of Spain, which then sees that rising up. And then, of course, eventually you get Napoleon. So it's worrying about a Napoleonic or a Bourbon empire. So it's fighting that. Plus there's, colonial conflicts with France pre-existing. It is only with the rise of from Prussia to the German Empire that Britain abandons basically it, not 100%, but mostly abandons its alliance, including with the rise of the German imperial fleet, even really pushes it more into it, abandoned its traditional alliance with Prussia, because England and Prussia had a long-standing, not always active alliance, but an alliance with Prussia that often would come to play to counterbalance either Austria and or France, depending on what war you're talking about. Abandons that to being more of a French alliance because it's seeing Spain a very, very much fading power and not necessarily part of the French sphere anymore, because France is vacillating between a weak Bourbon monarchy, a Bonapartist under Napoleon III, imperial situation, which they actually ally with that to go take out Mexico briefly. The U.S. leaves and France sort of stays, or a republic. So it's no longer part of, because the Bourbons also had like Sicily down here in southern Italy, so the Bourbons were growing everywhere, but they're no longer, in the later period. So they're allying with a France who is more isolated against German imperialism, maybe becoming dominant on the continent. And so they go with the French alliance. And then after that, they think by joining the EU or the European Common Market and whatever under Thatcher, in the later years under Thatcher, I don't think they see that necessarily as coming, which I do see that it's, so long as the EU continues to exist, it will move more into a United States of Europe kind of centralized government, in which states are just really sort of like American states in that they're subject to a central power. I think they thought they could be part of this and use that as a counterbalance to shift between the different factions. So no one faction, whether the German or the French, as I probably saw it at the time, would become dominant in the EU, that they would be sort of the counterbalance between the two of them. But they realized that that's not going to be the case, because it really looks like it's going to be a French-German alliance controlling the EU's lesser powers. So, and a popular uprising within Britain to get the votes for, leaving the EU. So Britain, and now Britain's policy is the old French policy. We surrender. Can we give away some of our territory to somebody else? Does anybody else maybe sort of have a claim on anything? Let's give it away. So Keir Starmer is definitely trying to oversee the dissolution. I think Keir Starmer would be tickled pink to have Scotland go independent and rejoin the EU. I think he would be tickled pink with that. He wants to see the dissolution of all of that. I know he doesn't say that outright, but I think so. So, geopolitics does come into it, and so okay, security Ukraine under Russia weakens NATO economy, disrupts global energy and food markets, power, hurts U.S. influence and deterrence. Okay, discussion. Is that a bad thing for the U.S.? If we're looking at a NATO that is no longer anything but America, you please help us alliance, and if we're looking at an EU that is trying to be a counterbalance, although they're doing very badly on the economic side of things because of massive overregulation as well as managed decline / eco-nuttilism. They've been doing the economy thing, but they still think they're going to be on top. Weakening all of that, I don't know that and it hurts U.S. influence and deterrence. The U.S. deterrence to what? Now, I'm pro-NATO, people. Guys, I know sometimes when I'm arguing positions here and asking for stuff, people will presume I have a, opinion on something. but, that is for it. I am pro-U.S. involvement in NATO. I'm not I don't think the EU is a good idea for Europe, but Europe gets to make its own choice on that. But I am pro-U.S. involvement in NATO. But I have to seriously question that, again, not asking for anything aggressive. And if they can sail through here peacefully, sure they have a minesweeper that will clear mines. But otherwise, just going back and forth here peacefully and only defending themselves and the ships that they're escorting, asking some nations to do that, and you're going, no? Now, again, it may just be that they really can't, and they don't want to admit publicly, go, oh, fuck, we don't have a boat that'll go to sea that'll be effective. We are completely ineffective. So, oh, hey, Argentina, yeah, take Falklands and South Georgia. Oh, hey, Cyprus, take the bases here because we couldn't even get soldiers there if we wanted to. We don't even have soldiers. Oh, hey, yeah, Turkey, if you want a few more of these Greek islands, knock yourself out, just go get them. We can't do nothing about it. Hey, yeah, oh, hey, Russia, you want to get the Baltic states. We don't have an army to stop you. We don't have a navy to do anything, or an air force. Yeah, just you can have the Baltic states. No problem. You want a little bit more of Finland? Go ahead, take it. We don't want to have anything. Oh, hey, China, you want to get control of Fiji? Go ahead. Go ahead. We can't do nothing about it. We can't. We don't even know if we can get an airplane out there to defend it, because the U.S. we're relying upon the U.S. to do it, and if the U.S. won't, you can just go. You can have Fiji. Whatever you want. I'm saying it in a joking way, but if they came out and publicly too much admitted, and not make it like a principled either anti-Trump or a pro-peace stand, they just came out and flat out, we can't do this. They're signaling to maybe a radical group in Fiji or something to uprise and overthrow the government, and Britain couldn't do anything about it. Or if Australia invades New Zealand, well, we can't do anything about it. Sorry, New Zealand dudes, or if Indonesia starts invading Australia, well, sorry guys, we're incapable. Can we give you an IOU? So yeah, I think it's as much that as anything else. Okay, yes. Security Ukraine under, yeah, I hear you. You spammed it a few times, but I hear it. Actually, I'm a dictator. Okay, 2Bs, what are you a dictator of? I'd love to hear that. It's deterrence and allows them to share intelligence and train together. Well, we can share intelligence without being in NATO. We train with non-NATO nations. We train with Australia. They're not part of NATO. If you don't know it, Australia and New Zealand are not part of NATO. Do you think America should get out of NATO, make official alliance with Japan, South Korea, and Asia areas for a Pacific alliance? Like I say, I am pro-U.S. involvement in NATO. I am also pro-Russia attacking the Baltic states. Why? Oh, and the U.S. doing nothing about it. Why? I love the Baltic states. Why do I want Russia to attack it? I don't. But NATO is a farce. If I were, again, I'd probably be a very terrible American president. I realize that. But whether it's Greenland or it's some other places, if I was the U.S. president, I would start demanding territory. Yeah, give us the Helgoland out here, this little island. Yeah, no, just give it to us. Remove all the Germans. It's going to be American territory. Fuck you guys. Unless you guys really stand up and immediately, I mean like within months, start cranking out rifles, start drafting your citizens, start really doing real, not just, we're increasing our budget, we're going to buy 10 more airplanes and 20 more tanks And we're also going to give better housing to the military children and the better school for our military. That's part of our military budget. Unless they really started to stand up, I would become an aggressor. For two reasons. I know this is not in the American psyche, but this is me. Two reasons. One, if we're having to put the bill to defend the cores of your nations, give us something. Now, if you want to just start giving us lots of money and gold and whatever, fine. You want to pay like half of the U.S. defense budget, turn it over in U.S. dollars, not because, Germany could just like do what they did in the 1920s and just start printing massive amounts of money to, actively give us, something that the U.S. wants, not just, worthless euros or something that they just start massively printing, but give us real value. They want to do that and pay for U.S. defense, pay us, fine, or give us territory, fine. Do that. And two, the other reason I want to do that is to show all of the Europeans, you're our little bitch. And when we say jump, how high is your correct response? And we'll do anything you want, America. I could get very vulgar just to be vulgar, but I'm not. We'll do whatever you want, whenever you want it, America. Either that's the way it's going to be, or you've got to step up, get back. Germany doesn't need to have plans to invade all of its neighbors, but Germany should have a large standing army. Germany should have a much larger, better, more professional standing army than Poland, but Poland is looking like to be the largest army in all of Europe, and maybe in a practical sense, not just, we have training camp here, training camp there, and this other base here, but in actual practical military readiness sense, Poland may end up having the largest army, larger than all the rest of the non-US, of course, armies in NATO, and probably not that big, but Poland's economy isn't nearly what the German, the French, British, Italian economies are right now. They should be able to have much larger armies. Even if they're like freaking bad armies, they should still be there and large. But they're not, and their navies should be large, and they're not. So I would not just in some diplomatic UN, NATO meeting, you must do 5% or 3% of your GDP spent on the military. No, we are actively taking something away from you if you do not. And the only way you can stop us is to militarize. So either you give us shit or you militarize. So you can militarize before you start giving us shit, or you start giving us shit. And by giving us, meaning we come in with guns and take it. France. It owns this little island right off here. St. Pierre and whatever. Why doesn't the U.S. just take it? No, it's a nice little island. It's on the U.S. continent. We'll just take it. Why not? What is France going to do anything about? Are they going to shoot back? Do they even have a garrison there? If the U.S. Marines show up one day, are the French forces going to attack a NATO base somewhere? Oh, what going to demand the U.S. leave? Well, fine, we'll leave NATO. I mean, it's, because it's not for a hatred or dislike. I mean, well, the French, yeah, but I mean, for the rest of Europeans, it's not for a hatred or dislike for them. It's them them is sucking off of America for defense and other things. And so I would be demanding stuff to get one way or another to push them to do this. And it's more of a tough love than anything else. Because we're no longer worried about the Soviet Union. I don't think seriously for the next 50 to 100 years, Russia is in a geopolitical position to really mess with America much. China is, and you're talking about in Asia. I don't know, because we can look at NATO, I don't know that formal military alliances with a name like SEATO, because there was a Southeast Asian whatever treaty organization that was sort of a defensive alliance during the Cold War. I think it's officially all gone. Whether, or maybe I don't know if officially any of it remains, but I think that to a point is useless. Because we can see official treaties and alliances that, an alliance like we can look at the Czechoslovak and Czechoslovak and French alliance that the French go, nope, out. Yeah, Germany can have Sudetenland. Oh, you took the rest of, okay, yeah, whatever. Formal alliances are meaningless, in my opinion, and I could cite some other ones, are meaningless. What is meaningful is real active alliances. Taiwan. The one party that was in control of Taiwan for the longest time was the nationalists, the Kuomintang. They were Chinese nationalists, or are Chinese nationalists. They have been hoping since the beginning of reunification. Now, of course, they were hoping for an anti-communist reunification. They then, once Hong Kong becomes more part of China again, which had been part of Britain, that they were hoping to be able to get a reunification and have, because with Hong Kong it was one nation, two systems. Well, that hasn't worked out. And now the Taiwanese people have realized that this isn't working out. But even they're the main opposition to the Taiwan People's Party. I mean, it sounds like a communist thing, but they're not really communists. And Taiwan is still officially the Republic of China. It's still officially the Republic of China. It is not the Republic of Taiwan. It has not given up its official status, its de jure status. The Kuomintang leadership is supposedly very soon, if not already going to do it. Maybe it's been because there's you guys don't realize that there's massive trouble at the upper levels of Chinese government right now. Massive situation. Arrests, killings, that kind of stuff has been going on. Meaning like the head of the army has been arrested and maybe killed. We don't know where he is. No, they won't give a solid answer that whether he's dead or alive. And so people believe that they would give proof of life if he was alive. They just say he's been arrested and is being investigated for treason. Which, that probably means he's dead. And the army isn't, or elements within the army are in near revolt. China cannot invade Taiwan right now. In a year or two it might be able to, but I mean, in a practical sense, China, even if the U.S. Navy isn't around. Okay. Well, Taiwan very much he hasn't been around for some time. I sort of miss having that information source. There was a Chinese viewer that was around for a while, and he left was stopped viewing because he went into he got, it was only like 6 months or something. He talked to me a little bit after he left. Or after out of it, for army training. And it was just sort of holiday camp, he said, or words to that effect. It wasn't very serious. Well, and this was a number of years ago. Since then, Taiwan has been stepping up its defense. It realizes that China will invade, and the Taiwanese people have decided that unification with China in the foreseeable future is not going to be good for them. It is not the sort of Deng Xiaoping, somewhat, loose control of the Communist Party that, Hong Kong can do its thing, Taiwan can do its thing, but we're all going to be one sort of nation together. And we'll all just sort of, no, they're seeing Xi has been, President Xi, XI, Elon Musk probably hates him mostly because he's, using X as his name. But Xi has been putting a lot of family members in positions and is very looking like he is trying to set up, and he doesn't want to acknowledge like a successor person, and he doesn't want to leave power because to a lot of people within the Chinese communist system, it looks like he's setting up a neo-imperial family around him. And so once he dies of old age or whatever, his successor will be from his family, and it'll be family controlled. And much, much more centralized control with the leader, whoever, Xi or whoever, than it had been, because and I'm not a great expert on the Chinese government, but there was a lot of regional control. Now, it was all Chinese Communist Party control, but there was a lot of regional control around different parts of China. But it's being a lot more centralized now. It's because there had been within the Chinese Communist Party, I would say, a reasonable amount. I almost said a lot, but a reasonable amount of bottom up. Yeah, you had to be thought to be a loyal member of the party, whatever the party believed in, whether it believed in communism or just believed in, itself, just as an apparatchik organization. You had to be a member of thought to be a loyal member of the party, but there was a lot of bottom up governorship, rulership, or whatever, people, regional, local pushing up, and a certain amount of top down, from the central authority. But under Xi, it's been very much focused on the top down instead of a regional successor for, the guy gets too old and retires down here, and then the people, the leaders. Now, I'm not talking like the mass people. I'm talking, the clique of leadership elements down here picking their new regional governor or whatever the hell, being picked down here. No, he's being somebody coming from Beijing who may have his career out here in Shanghai, is being sent down here to rule down here, instead of getting local people. It's very much centralization. So the people of Taiwan realize this, and so they're getting serious about rearming. Japan has realized that. And one commentator said Japan is planning on going it alone. No, Japan is planning on being a very, very close U.S. ally. But unlike Europe, they realize that the U.S. cannot, not won't, but cannot defend them in all instances. So they must be the primary defense for Japan, where a lot of Europe, their national armies are secondary defenses. The primary defense they're relying upon is like the American nuclear umbrella, and then, U.S. carriers and U.S. reinforcements or whatever. They might be the tripwire. They might have, the Lithuanian army on the border of Russia. But Lithuania isn't relying on itself for defense. It's relying upon the U.S. and whoever else to come to its aid. Japan has realized that the U.S. cannot, not won't, not is undesirable, but cannot be that for Japan. Because, yes, if there's enough warning, if the current U.S. president takes that warning seriously, because they realize that presidents can shift and change, if the U.S. is not bogged down or whatever in some other theater of operations, the U.S. might be able to be there, but a might is not will be there 24/7 forever in the future. Japan has realized this. Japan, I do not believe, is going to go aggressive and restart a Japanese empire. I don't see that in the Japanese psyche. Oh, I'm sure there's fringe elements, as there always is, but I'm saying in the central fringe psyche. But they're remilitarizing. But I see them now very much in sort of the U.S. style of trying to maybe have influence with nations like South Korea, like with Taiwan, like with the Philippines or something, but not trying to control them. And Japan has a large enough economy, it has a large enough population to become a major dominant power there. And they're also still technologically more advanced than those other nations. I know TSMC and some of the microchips, but Japan still overall, and also technology, Japan can build missiles and build submarines to a technological level that Taiwan can't. Taiwan might have technically more advanced microchips and hence some computer elements more advanced, but some of the other advanced manufacturing locally in Japan is still, to my knowledge, better than you're going to see in Korea and better than you're going to see in Taiwan. Now, it may not be hugely better, but somewhat better. So it is more and Japan is realizing this, and Japan, sometimes Japan speaks from central authority. I'm not saying commands, I'm saying speaks from it. Meaning the prime minister will say things, or the head of a ministry will say something. Sometimes Japan goes and talks to people quietly within their society, and then those people start. This is the way Japanese culture goes way back, and those people start speaking up. I am definitely seeing a very hey bro American element coming out of Japan that's trying to speak to America. I don't know how much of that is happening within Japan's internal conversation, but definitely there have been a lot of Japanese who don't speak. Most Japanese don't speak English. Most Japanese get English in their school, but that doesn't mean they can speak it. They use a lot of English words, but they will say something like baiku or baike or whatever, because they like to put a vowel at the end of after a consonant. So they don't like the word bike with a hard K. They want to bikey or whatever. They want to. I don't know what they're, they use American loan words, but they change it enough that if we really weren't paying really close attention, knowing the context of their conversation, we wouldn't catch it as an American word or an English word or whatever. And so their English is for most people is very, very poor, and they sort of book learn and pass the test and forget. And I know some of the stuff that's been passed around on Twitter and some other stuff right now recently comes up, with Google Translate, or have been translated by Twitter or whatever, Twitter Translate. So these are people that are not English fluent. They're using Google or Twitter or whatever to translate their interactions with the Americans. But these are grassroots people, not government officials, that they're interacting a lot with Americans right now. I think Japan is realizing it needs to, partially because the people have died off, and which is a very legitimate thing. Once something becomes gone out of not living memory, but I remember grandparents and other people. My grandfather's brother was a Marine who fought the Japanese. I never met him. He died when I was very young, and he was living up in Alaska, but I've heard stories. My grandmother's cousin, which I knew very well, he was a career soldier. I had a lot of very interesting discussions. He tried to get me, and this was during, because he was still in the Army. He was just retired, I think, at the time, but he still had lots of influential friends. Oh yeah, one of his XOs was this guy named, his XO was, what was his name? Oh yeah, Colin Powell, who was, Joint Chiefs of Staff or whatever at the time. Yeah, no, he knew Colin Powell very well and continued friendship well past. In Vietnam, he was his XO in Vietnam. He was a U.S. Army paratrooper who liberated some of the U.S. Army, or some of the prisoners in the Philippines fighting the Japanese. So he had fought the Japanese. And so he wasn't my grandfather, but he was of my grandfather's generation, heard stories, from people about World War II. So I'm about the last age to really have contact directly with people. And I know there's a few 100-year-old veterans of this and whatever that are dying, and it's sad, but it's inevitable. So to a point, we have to, because it wasn't just a war with the Italians. The war with the Italians, there is no great atrocities. I'm not saying there was zero atrocities, but no great atrocities done to America by Italians. So there's no big hurt feelings by Americans for Italians because of World War II. They were just the guys we fought. Sort of like the Germans were in World War I for us, for the Americans. It's different for other nations. But they were just the guys we fought, and once the war was over, lots and lots of Germans emigrated to the Americans that were former soldiers. They weren't faced with any particular anti-Germanism. Veterans weren't like, oh my God, I hate you because you're German. No, you just were the guys that we fought. The Japanese, because of both Pearl Harbor and then the way they treated our prisoners of war, which was terrible, worse than the Germans did. The Germans treated the Western allies, particularly the British and the Americans, but also the French. The French better than the Japanese treated their prisoners, including the Western prisoners. The Japanese treated them abominable. Those two things, the Pearl Harbor one level, but the prisoners, and they also were known to be fight sort of dirty, but that's just fight. It was the prisoners that really made Americans hate the Japanese. The Japanese made a massive mistake with that. We can talk about their massive mistake of just going to war, but their activities towards, and it's not just Americans, it was the British, it was the Dutch, and I know they were also abominable, terrible to the Chinese. I'm not saying that, but what matters is mostly is what they do to you or your group, And so that's passing out of living memory, and it is becoming the old dudes remember Grandpa talking about, those that knew. Like I say, one was a family member that I didn't know, one that I did know quite well, who fought the Japanese, not just there was a war and Japan was on the other side, but who fought the Japanese and who liberated American prisoners, and saw the conditions. Weren't quite the death camps of Auschwitz or whatever, but we're damn near it. Damn near. Yeah. So, and no, I don't blame the modern Japanese for what their ancestors did, but they are a continuation of their ancestors. So Japan is doing the thing right and trying to not anymore run around and apologize for what they did in World War II, but trying to move past it and trying to build a social alliance with America. So that's more important than a treaty alliance. If you have a social alliance, if, say, I know 3 Japanese people, through the interwebs, and they talk to me periodically about Japan, well, I'm going to have a connection with people in Japan. And so that, if that region is being threatened, if Americans, generally speaking, have associations with Japan that are positive, or Korea, or Taiwan, or the Philippines, and we do have heavy associations, particularly with the Philippines. It's going to be a different relationship, obviously, but a heavy one. With those kind of things, that is better to build an alliance than any sort of NATO-style centralized command. And to a point, they all need to be able to do everything and fight on their own for a while. Because maybe the U.S. needs a while to get ready, or maybe the U.S. involved in something else. But yeah, that's, I guess, this. Let's see. Let's just finish up with the chat here. I guess American defense companies won't sustain profits if U.S. isn't in NATO. War is a racket. Why is war being a racket a bad thing? I know, and I was thinking this the other day, Tubies. War profiteer. What is it? Gamers Nexus was calling NVIDIA a war profiteer. What's wrong with being a war profiteer? What's wrong with making money from war? War is a terrible thing. Can't some positive element comes out of it? I'm serious. What's wrong with making money in war? I'm for making money in war. I think we should make all kinds of money in war. I know, how do I put this? The left will use any lever it can to destroy the current status quo because they want a new status quo from the left. So they will come up with any propaganda that they think will work with the general population. I hate pacifists. I hate pacifists almost as much as I hate communists. Pacifists are evil. Pacifists are somebody that are saying, oh, hey, you want to murder and rape my wife? Well, I'll just sit here and watch the TV. Go ahead. Because I'm a pacifist. I won't put up my hands to defend my wife. Oh, you've killed my child? Well, fine. You've killed my child. I'm just going to watch TV. Oh, you're going to kill me now? Okay. Where are you going to stick the knife in? I'll just sit here and let you stick a knife in. I think that is evil. And to spread that ideology of pacifism, of whatever, because other evil is out there, I believe these people are evil. I believe much of the people that spread the pacifist ideology are not pacifists. They just are using pacifists. People that think that pacifism can work. I'm not necessarily for everybody being, we got to go to war now. You know, the one of the winners of World War II, Switzerland. They also won World War I. They didn't get involved, you know, in any direct fighting. I mean, they were diplomatic and there was some trade and whatnot, but they won the war by not getting involved. But Switzerland didn't get involved because they mobilized their people into an army. They elected a general, Gustan or whatever whatever his name was. I can picture him in my face as some weird Franco name. Because Switzerland doesn't have any generals. They elect one general in times of emergencies. All they go up is to colonels in their army. Yeah. Be warlike. But you don't have to go to war. You know, be ready for war. Be armed up. See, Switzerland, with everybody having a gun and having, you know, a serious army, that, you know, you don't, you know, I'm not saying the opposite of an aggressive nature isn't pacifism. It can be, you know, it can be armed up. You know, it's not like, oh, if we have an army, we're going to go to war. Because that's the only reason to have an army, is so you can go to war. No, you're going to have an army not to go to war. I am not against the idea of a nation like Switzerland or whoever that goes, don't mess with us. Everyone else have a nice day. Oh, you did something stupid in the Middle East and oil prices go up? Okay, our oil prices go up because we don't have oil. You know, it's just like, we'll roll with the punches, you know, of world events. But we're not getting involved. We're not involved in NATO. We're not going to send troops to Afghanistan because somebody attacks America. We're only going to defend ourselves. Okay, I'm cool with that. You know, if whether it's Korea or Bangladesh or Switzerland wanting to be an isolationist nation and arm themselves up, and you're also not really asking to you know, for somebody else to come and protect you. I mean, not that, you know, if let's say it's, you know, 1916, the war's going on and Germany goes, shit, we can't win this going what we're doing. Let's see if we invade through Switzerland and take France. That way we'll do that. Not that at that point, Switzerland just goes, go, be my guest, go on through. No, they fight to defend themselves. And then obviously at that point, they would be joining the Western Allies, or whatever you want to call it, the Entente, because they've been directly attacked, so they're in it now. And they're going to now coordinate with the Western Entente, you know, because whether the Tsarist Russia is too far away from them to coordinate, but you know what I'm talking about, because it's also potentially Italy and Belgium, France, Britain, whoever. And yeah, they're just, you know, so yeah, you know, if you're Bangladesh and there's a larger, you know, say if you're Bangladesh and China and India are at war, and you go, hey, we're not getting involved, we're staying out. And then say if China invades, because they're, you know, pushing down through this and it's just convenient territory to come through, part because it's sort of this sort of border, you know, if they're like, you know, if India's holding them here and you know, China's taken all of Assam, which is out here, and oh, well, we're just going to go through Bangladesh. Well, then Bangladesh may become, you know, an ally of India for the war because they've been directly attacked. Because this is also, well, down here is Bangladesh. Down here in Calcutta is Bangladesh, I do believe. But it's more like here and then down here. But you know, and so yeah, well, now we're at war. But before, you know, but they're not also expecting India, if Burma or Myanmar or whatever decides to attack the Rohingya or whatever, the sort of Muslim Bangladeshis that are in this area, and wants to grab up some, is it a territorial dispute or something? India might just go, yeah, okay, that's your lookout, Bangladesh. You're not part of our alliance. We're not part of your alliance. Yeah. As long as have your little war, have fun. Now, if they attack us, we'll join, or if you attack us, we'll join their side, or I'm not against nations sort of going, isolationist, but pacifism is evil. So I don't have a problem, and a full disclosure, I used to have from the U.S. government an international arms license, which, if you know anything about it, it is equivalent to an end user license in international arms. Okay. My license, I know I have a copy somewhere in a file. It's out of, it needs to be renewed, and I didn't renew it at some point. Because I used to be in the business. It allowed me to buy any weapons I wanted to buy short of NBC, nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons. So if I wanted to buy a bunch of fighters, now I didn't have the money to buy it in fighters. I was mainly looking to, and I did do some importation of weapons into the United States, small arms. That's what I was trying to do with it. But it was a license, and I had Eastern, because this was when, this is post Cold War, and they were selling off. You may have seen the movie Lord of War. I was an unsuccessful arms dealer. I'll readily admit it was unsuccessful. Went out of business. But I did travel to Eastern Europe and meet some of these companies. I had these companies. Oh, here's our price list. Price for T-55 tanks. Price for T-72 tanks. Oh, MiG-21s, MiG-23s. Okay. I had these, the people that had or could get weapons, buy them off of the governments or something. I had an international arms license, so maybe my views are skewed. But I have absolutely no moral qualms of making money out of war. That doesn't mean I would have zero moral qualms about selling weapons to someplace like Iran, which I think is an evil government, or North Korea, which I think is an evil government. That kind of thing. You're not saying I would sell guns to anybody. Sell guns to Idi Amin. No, I don't think so. Some other African dictator who's not super terrible? Well, yeah, sure. Because you're not super terrible, because you look around, African dictators are African dictators. They're, I don't know if there's any good ones. There's, less bad ones and whatnot. So certainly. And I actually did talk, just peripherally about some things way back when. And Gamer's done a few things, been involved. And this is what I say when I've been peripherally involved in some stuff. It's, and I did have an international arms dealer license. Now, when I was getting it, I actually didn't realize it was going to include things like fighter aircraft, and I could buy bombs and air-to-air missiles and surface-to-air missiles. And now the U.S. definitely informed me that I could buy these things, because I did talk to them a little bit about it. But if I was going to sell them, I needed to get their permission. So if I wanted to buy a bunch of SA-7s, say from Bulgaria's, reserves that they're selling off of old SA-7, those are the older shoulder air surface-to-air missiles, and I had the money, I could buy them. But the U.S., and this was now getting into the State Department, not my licensing agency, which was the ATF, actually, the licensing agency. And I did deal with the State Department just a little bit. I don't want to overstate it, but just a little bit. If I were to buy some of these things, they needed to approve my selling of them. So if I wanted to sell them to like an approved guerrilla movement in Africa, that would be fine. But if they didn't want me to sell it to some African dictator, which they didn't like, that would not be. So I had to obey the rules, but I could buy whatever I wanted to. But it was how I disposed of it was, So if I wanted to sell it to the Chilean government or something, sure, fine, because they're, these wouldn't be and they would just approve it sort of automatically, not specifically with Chile, but because these weren't on the restricted list from the U.S. government. And I could also buy U.S. weapons, non-restricted list, what they would be willing to sell. Yeah, to those kind of governments, yeah, that's just, yeah, go ahead, fine. You want to buy a bunch of whatever, if I wanted to buy a bunch of M60 machine guns and sell them to Chile, yeah, knock yourself out. That's basically a rubber stamp. Still got to get the approval for export, but that's just basically a rubber stamp. It's the higher level packages that Congress has to approve the sale of to something like Taiwan for some of these high level munitions. It really isn't if we were going to sell them a bunch of M16 rifles. I mean, Taiwan is sort of a special case in that they, we don't actually have an embassy and whatever. But I don't really think that needs like congressional approval. It's more the higher tech, bigger stuff. But if I was dealing with foreign stuff that may never actually even show up in the U.S., buy it, keep it in a international warehouse somewhere, and then sell it to something else. Yeah, no, and I, like I say, I don't have a problem with companies making money out of war. Knock yourself out and make all the kind of money you want. Now, of course, from a national perspective, I don't want Lockheed or whoever to ramp up the price of something just because we're at war. No, you make your price. If it costs $1 billion for an airplane, it costs $1 billion for an airplane, and you're making your profit margin 10% probably or something. Yeah, so you're making your percentage on it as profit over and above all the various costs, not just the cost of the parts, but cost of running the company and running all this stuff. Yeah, you're making a profit. Go ahead. Now it's not like you charge us $2 billion because you can or something. No. That's that kind of war exploitation or something, meaning trying to hold the government hostage for more money or something. Now that's a different matter. But just that you're making money out of war, go ahead. And maybe you think I'm evil, but I don't. I don't think I'm evil. Yeah, make money out of war all you want. That's cool. I think we prefer they modify NATO to a worldly one to expand NATO into the Middle East. God, no. God, no. I don't want to expand NATO outside of Europe and North America. That's in the name of the treaty. No, I actually want to kick Turkey out of NATO. I think Turkey's trajectory is going towards an Islamic state. Not just that there's Muslims living there, because there always had been a majority, when they've been in NATO, always been a majority Muslim nation, but Ataturk and then the later successor military governments had been mostly secular in governmental policies. Yes, ruling over a Muslim majority nation, but and not always maybe behaving 100%, but good. But see invasion of Cyprus and Armenia and other places. But it's becoming more and more of a Muslim governed state. And I think, I know they've lost any hopes of becoming a member of the EU because of that, their Islamification. No, I do not think the Middle East should be included in NATO. You can do individual alliances with places like Saudi Arabia, UAE, or Jordan, or something like that. Okay, cool. Whether I like the particular alliance with the particular government is another question, but cool if you want to, in concept. Either formal or informal alliances, because we do have, I would say, an informal alliance with the U.S. has with Egypt right now. We have an informal alliance. And it may be very informal, but we do have an alliance because U.S. and Egypt does have concerns over the Red Sea that are mutual concerns, and which includes issues of Sudan, the Houthis, and others. Now, it doesn't mean Egypt is going to war with either the Sudanese or the Yemenis or the Houthis or whatever, but we have a sort of working agreements, if you will, informally or formally or whatever, with Egypt. And that's cool. That's fine. Again, I'm not talking about any particular one. If you want to point it out, may be bad. I'll agree, but we'll see. I kind of wish someone who militaristically forced NATO to make a bigger army, like perhaps share Iceland or something. Well, yeah, thank you for your professor of history and explaining some things. I hope it's interesting. Hey, Niagara, my friend. Good to see you here, my old friend. I know we just finally got down to you. It's been a little while, but thank you for coming here. Yes, just giving history lectures. And I guess as so I haven't seen a Heavenly Spirit around before, at least under that name that I recognize. And just everybody know I'm alive both on Twitch and YouTube. If you're not realizing I'm on the other channel, I am on both and seeing both chats. And it's slightly more delayed because of that. Like I say, I am personally in favor of the U.S. being in the NATO alliance. I am personally enraged with many of the NATO alliance governments and their stupid policies. Britain wanting to get rid of the Chagos, which obviously Chagos is currently, is one of the islands in the Chagos Islands is Diego Garcia, which is currently British territory, which means it's currently NATO territory, wanting to give it away to a non-NATO member, and which I know that the deal is basically stalled and probably not going to happen, and actually trying to give the islands away to to more or less a Chinese ally, maybe more informal, but heavily influenced. Mauritius is heavily influenced by China. We might see a coup there someday and get rid of the Chinese people. Hey, we've done that before in the recent Pacific. I mean, as in the last 10 years, we've taken out a few soft coups or whatever in some of those little Pacific islands that there's been basically in some of those islands, two families that have been governing that have been winning and losing elections. And we've sort of done some soft coups against some families that, and, cliques or whatever that had, and these are just, 5,000, 10,000 or whatever people living on a little island, or a small group of islands out in the Pacific that have been cozying up to China, and we've sort of done some soft coups to get rid of them from power and put people that are going to respond to be pro-U.S. So it's not like we're coming in and assassinating anybody. We're just coming in and making sure there's a governmental change. And no, you can do some of your own stuff, but no, you're not going into China's pocket. Because in essence, you're being defended by us, and China will just swallow you otherwise, and we're not going to allow that. So some of the times I'm arguing what I think is going to happen, and what if NATO is going to be this limp-wristed, or even this, if NATO governments become purely, well, yeah, we're in NATO, we're a staunch NATO member. We will defend Europe if Europe is attacked from anybody. Oh, a NATO member is having a conflict in some other part. Well, we're not going to get involved. We're not going to help. Oh, we're not even like Spain. We're not even going to allow you to use our bases, that we have agreements to let you use our bases. If that's your attitude, even if NATO was strong militarily, now it being strong would mean the U.S., even if it was more isolationist, that would mean the U.S. would still want to maybe be involved to keep it from becoming a hostile power bloc, keep involved there. But it being weak and becoming hostile, I don't know why there's benefit for the U.S. That doesn't mean I say I want to be involved with NATO, but if I were the U.S. president, I go, hey, yeah, I'm very pro-NATO. I'm so pro-NATO. Yeah, I know. And they're supposedly Keir Starmer is negotiating with the Spanish to give up Gibraltar. Maybe that's just a false rumor, but my understanding is he's wanting to give up Gibraltar. Why doesn't the U.S. just show up and go, hi, British official, yeah, you're being, I'm almost literally would sort of plan it and then have guys show up and, yeah, you border patrol people, yeah, move over to the left. We're going to have these Americans control the border here with Spain. And, your policemen, yeah, we brought in some American policemen. You guys, hand in your badge, hand in your gun. Are you going to stay a Gibraltar citizen or resident? Yes. Are you going to want to sign up to be an American citizen? Oh, no? Okay. We'll put you on a plane back to England. Have a nice day. Anybody living in Gibraltar will need to become an American citizen and go through the citizenship actively go through the citizenship process and swear loyalty and oath to the American United States. If not, you've got to leave. And I'm serious, with the way Britain is behaving, I just take Gibraltar and say, suck it. What are you going to do? I mean, Keir Starmer would be mad because it would be the imperialist Americans taking it, not the rightful Spanish. And all of them, Exergent is probably already left here, but it's getting late in Europe, I know. But the British friends, they might be real upset with America, but why? Why? You're not caring, really. Oh, you individually might, but your country isn't caring about Gibraltar. I just take it as a nice little American basing colony. And just take it. And what is England going to do about it? Leave NATO and go to war with the U.S.? Or just leave NATO? Well, so it just, and just do these things. And I'm serious. I would be doing something like that. And I wouldn't just immediately turn it back over if they start rearming. Just no, you've lost Gibraltar. Pray we don't alter the deal more. France, you just lost this little Pierre whatever. You've lost this, because this is not Canadian territory. This is French territory. You've lost this. You've become weak. You've lost this. It is America now. Do you want to get strong and be a partner? Great. You still lost this, but you won't lose any more. Okay, guys, I want to thank everybody, even Niagara, who just showed up. Tubi's Heavenly Spirit. You can disagree with me either on my historical analysis or what I think should be done or what I think will happen. Tubi's, I didn't say, just thank you. Dutovit. I have trouble with your name. I'm sorry. It's Dutov Devlich. I don't know. Not common for me to say. But so, yeah, it's... The End of History book, Fukuyama's book, I believe it's Fukuyama that wrote it, did so much damage with that book. And history isn't over. Okay, see y'all. I'll be back maybe the normal time. I know I started this 2 hours. I scheduled it for 2 hours later than normal. I think hopefully for the normal time for War Thunder tomorrow. If you want to join? I mean, I can maybe talk a little bit while driving tanks, but it's going to be mostly playing. Okay, yes, I'd love to see you there, Niagara. Everybody's welcome either to watch and or join. If we get a lot of people, if we ever get lots of people, again, we'll start doing custom battles. And, if we can get 8 or 10 people to want to play, I'll set up custom battles and it'll just be us playing, But I at least want 4 people aside. I just don't want like 2-on-2. At least 4 people aside. So if we get a lot of people ever, we'll set up custom battles. It's just a few. We'll rotate people in and out, but you're all welcome. Okay, thank you, guys. Don't hate me just because I'm me, but if you want to, you can. I'm just trying to negotiate my understanding of the